Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Claudia and I grew up in a beautiful country home in close proximity to the charming, very cosy mountain town of Ketham with my grown-up half-sister Gladys, who was my father's daughter from a previous marriage, and my younger brother Gerald. Ketham is situated very close to Sun Valley Resort in Idaho, long revered for its phenomenal and exciting ski slope areas at Bald Mountain, and of course the more gentle slopes at Dollar Mountain. Sun Valley is home to the world's first chairlift that was installed on Dollar and Proctor Mountain in 1936, which puts Sun Valley on the map as a ski resort. Our area is filled with miles upon miles of glorious mountain trails, equestrian routes, and wildflower-filled meadows, ablaze with all manner of pretty flowers in mauves, pinks, and purples and blues. There are very well-marked trails from town, offering pathways up Proctor Mountain for spectacular views over the glorious valleys. Growing up in this part of the world was an extreme privilege because you're surrounded by so much incredible beauty, and I hope I have never taken it for granted, as from an early age, hiking, fishing, riding, mountain biking, exploring, camping and horse riding were a quintessential part of our lives. My mother worked as a doctor in town locally, and my father was recruited to take tourists on horse riding trails around the Ketham area. He invariably told us the most phenomenal stories of all kinds of amazing people he met from all over the globe, like Sweden, Norway, Australia and Africa. Many of our visitors preferred Ketham to places like Aspen because they said it was so much more relaxed here, less ostentatious, snooty or showy, and much more spread out. Without wishing to be biased, I really believe our ski slopes are superb, and they're always so well groomed and maintained for all our guests who come here to ski. People also enjoy visiting this part of the world in summer for the hiking, exploring, horse riding and fishing opportunities. Our symmetrical whitewashed farmhouse is nestled in an idyllic, awe-inspiring setting, flanked by statuesque mountains at the rear and quaking aspen trees on its right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, there is a large field of sagebrush that eventually opens out into a heavily wooded area, where there are tiny little streams of gushing water that meander through this woodland stretch, filled with crystal clear, sparkling water. My first ever experience with a Bigfoot happened in 1998, when I was about 8 years old, and Gerald, my brother, was about 7. It was my older sister Gladys's responsibility to take care of us while my parents were out working, but Gladys did not know the meaning of the word responsibility, and she failed at her childcare duties abysmally. At 17 years old, she was always on the phone giggling and joking with her boyfriend, and was easily distracted, so much so that we could pretty much do what we liked without Gladys even batting an eyelid or even noticing a single thing. Without wishing to be nasty, Gladys was quite unequivocally the world's worst babysitter. Her inability to notice what we got up to meant that we had free rein to do almost anything that we wanted. On one occasion, my brother and I used our acrylic paints to paint pictures all over our bedroom walls of ducks and fish and houses and people, and Gladys tried to cover the evidence up for my parents by claiming that we hadn't painted the murals under her watch, and so, of course, it wasn't her fault. One day, while Gladys was otherwise preoccupied, my brother and I had run through the sagebrush and were chasing each other around the wooded area, screaming with delight at the top of our lungs with words like, "You can't catch me! Catch me if you can!" I remember I was running away from my brother along the trail across a little rocky pool of water from the stream. I slipped over some jagged rocks, falling very hard on my knees, and I began to howl like a baby because it hurt so very much. I admit in those days I was a huge wimp. All of a sudden, this very large bear ran out of the woods towards me and immediately lifted me out of the puddle, bending over to study my grazed knees, where the skin had broken and it was bleeding. I was gladdened and chuffed by the attention that the bear was devoting to my grievous injury, and she was so much nicer than Gladys would ever have been. My sister would have reacted with so little sympathy and would have probably told me to stop being such a great big baby and to go and get a plaster for myself. However, this nice bear was making such a fuss over me and was so attentive to my injury. She whistled while she began washing the blood off my graze from the spring water in the puddle. I was amazed that the bear had a human-like face and bright brown eyes that looked at me warmly, as if to say, "I'm going to make it all better for you." I stopped crying immediately and just stared at her with wide, curious eyes. And before long my brother had joined us in a nonchalant way, as if meeting a bear like this was perfectly normal. I think he was also enamoured and enthralled to see the bear fussing over us, as for a child an oversized walking teddy bear was not beyond the realms of impossibility, or the paradoxical, as we were open to believing in things that adults would dismiss as fictitious or inconceivable. For as small children, there were no boundaries between the world of fairy tales and the natural world, as we were open to strange, infeasible experiences that we considered normal, for in our childlike reality there were no limitations. The very nice bear glided away for a moment, returning with some leaves which she rubbed on my bloodied gash, and I remember the pain just dissipated like magic, and I began to giggle. "It doesn't hurt any more," I said happily. The bear then very methodically and skillfully placed a few leaves over my injury, and wound some twine around my knee to make a makeshift bandage. I remember thinking it was so cool to have a bandage made from leaves. Gerald became so begrudgingly jealous that I had a leafy green bandage and he did not, so he began to cry bitterly, because it wasn't fair as far as he was concerned. The bear seemed to understand his sorry plight and immediately gave him a bandage on his knee as well, and we proudly returned home with our leaved plasters tied together with twine, hobbling along as if we were in pain, hoping to draw attention to ourselves and to our fabulous plasters. As to be expected, Gladys was otherwise preoccupied, so much so that she barely noticed our bandaged knees. She was so wrapped up and engrossed with talking to a friend of hers on the phone. I never understood why my big sister would talk to her boyfriend and then phone her girlfriend to tell her everything her boyfriend had said to her on the phone, as if analysing the conversation through a microscope. It never made any sense to me at all. My big sister was very strange as far as I was concerned. When my parents were away, it was like Gladys became superglued to that telephone. But when my mother returned from work, she acted as if she had been babysitting and watching over us intently. Gladys knew how to pull the wool over my parents' eyes with her guileful techniques of persuasion. My mother would thank her profusely for taking such great care of us and promptly reward her with a huge wad of cash for all her trouble. On this occasion it was my mother that asked us why we had leaves on our knees tied together with twine, and my sister interceded and said we'd been playing a game of doctors and nurses together. Gladys would lie with the straightest face on her, and my mother never doubted her word. I promptly told my mother that it was a bear in the woods that had attended to our wounds, and not Gladys, and my mother laughed. "That's very nice, dear," she said. "It must have been a very nice bear." She then turned around to Gladys and said, "You never cease to amaze me, Gladys, how adventurous you are with the children. I like the leaf bandage idea. It's such a creative touch, and awfully imaginative of you. You are clever. Well, I've always been creative with kids, said Gladys. When the cat's away, the mouse will most certainly play. And once my parents were out of the way, you could bet that my sister Gladys was almost always caught up with her boyfriend issues, which was so common as she attracted drama in her life like a bee to a honeypot. I always remember her conversations went something like this. I never told her you were a loser. She was lying to you. I think she's just jealous because we've been together for 6 whole months. No, I promise you I'm not lying. Of course I like you. Then we would hear her on the phone reprimanding her girlfriend. Why did you tell him I said he was a loser? Of course I like him. I was just having a bad day, that's all. Why did you have to tell him that? My brother and I would stealthily sneak past my sister in the entrance hall and run through the sagebrush towards the wooded area to see if we could see the bear with the human face, and we were rarely ever disappointed. We would sit by the stream while the creature would play with our hair, braiding it into hundreds of tiny braids and tying the ends up with twine. My brother and I adored it when she played with our hair, as it was like having a head massage. It was so relaxing. As the bear braided our hair, she whistled lovely tunes to us that incorporated bird tweets and warbles, and you would literally have believed you were listening to a vast range of birds in the forest. Sometimes if we heard a bird tweet, she would copy the bird exactly and try and teach us to do the same. She could imitate a coyote, a dog, an owl, a turkey and a pig to perfection. She was brilliant. We both taught her to say our names, which she did with little difficulty. When we asked her what her name was, she pointed to the acorns, so we called her Acorn. I assure you that after spending hours in the wooded area with Acorn, when we did eventually return home, Gladys was still in the entrance hall, on the phone, and hadn't even noticed that we had gone missing. When my mother saw our hair braided in hundreds of braids, she was exceedingly impressed with Gladys for spending so much time playing with us, and once again applauded my sister for her patience, and ended up giving her more money for her trouble. When my brother and I were older, we didn't really see our bear friend Acorn anymore. Obviously by then we had realised with the advantage of maturity that she wasn't a bear, and considered that she was like a human that was covered in hair. Life seemed to march forward very fast at a rapid pace in those early years, as we got so caught up in all our schoolwork and extracurricular activities after school. I would take ballet and art and swimming classes, while my brother did judo and gymnastics. There was less time to spend in the wooded area on our land, and it would seem we were distracted by friends' birthday parties and all kinds of other activities. When we were free, my brother and I would go riding together over the countryside on our 2 family horses, as by then we had become passionate horse riders. We were exposed to some fantastic riding trails out here in Ketham, and my father taught us to become accomplished riders. One day on one of our horse-riding adventures, which invariably were always marvellously enjoyable, as we loved trotting through the panoramic landscape and feasting our eyes upon the quintessential marvels of the natural world, which we never ceased to applaud and appreciate. On this particular occasion, my brother and I were casually talking together as we trotted through a flowery meadow, taking a swift shortcut towards the horse trail that was lined with quaking aspen trees. I remember we were talking about who I would be inviting to my 16th birthday party in June that year. Saxon Rose was my bay and black Morgan horse, and although beautiful, she was exceedingly temperamental and would easily get spooked. On this particular occasion, some silver air balloons had got caught up in the quaking aspen trees that were whistling in the breeze, causing the silvery, sparkling balloons to whip around the branches very precariously, making a beating, rustling sound that was at the very least very unsettling for the horses. Saxon Rose became so frantic that she began to buck and backtrack on her steps, turning around where she whipped back across the meadow from whence we'd formerly come, like a bucking bronco, and despite being a proficient rider, I was seemingly unable to control her frenzied panic. Before I knew it, I was being flung off her back violently, landing on the grassy meadow below. But although I was fine, I appeared to have twisted my ankle rather badly, as it had got caught up in the stirrups during the fall. I was groaning in agony as the pain was shooting through my foot, and I lay on the ground, realizing in horror that I couldn't walk on my painful ankle. It was swelling up quite significantly. Needless to say, Saxon Rose, who had been trembling with fear and extremely skittish and overwrought, was not waiting for anyone at all, and had galloped off home, leaving me there stranded in the field. My brother, having realized what had just transpired, told me to stay put while he went back to get help. But imagine our surprise when our old friend Acorn made a sudden, unexpected appearance. We could hear her thundering through the grass towards us. We were so delighted to see her. It was amazing because after all these years she still had remembered our names. She looked at me and said, "Claudia," and began examining my leg. She pulled me up by my arm, raising me on my feet with her large hands and trying to encourage me to walk, but I barely managed to hobble. Acorn grabbed a bunch of petals from a nearby flowering plant and began rubbing the petals over the swelling, and it was very soothing. I do remember salty tears were pouring down my cheeks, not because I was in pain, but because I was so thrilled to see Acorn again. I realised how much I'd missed her, how long it had been, and seeing her brought back nostalgic memories of my early life. My brother was climbing down his horse, and I could tell he was choking up with emotions to see Acorn again as well. I could tell he was trying hard not to show his feelings, but he was not succeeding in hiding how thrilled he was to see our old friend. He embraced Acorn by giving her a friendly, informal pat on the back, although I think he would secretly rather have given her a hug. But getting older had made him less effusive and much more restrained and wary of showing his feelings. Acorn was so pleased to see the both of us and started whistling happily like the good old days. It was funny because my brother's horse, Airborne Magic, was not remotely spooked by Acorn at all, despite the fact that she was covered in hair and so very large in size. Acorn indicated for my brother to ride back home on Airborne Magic, while she threw me over her shoulders like a sack of oranges and trotted diligently alongside his horse at the very same speed without getting remotely out of breath, and the ride was smoother on her than it had been on Saxon Rose. I was amazed because Acorn was naturally shy, reticent and self-effacing, but she courageously carried me back to the house, delivering me promptly outside the kitchen door, with the awkward risk of being seen by my parents, which she was eager to avoid. I reached out and gave her a huge hug, but of course with Acorn being so large, I could barely get my arms around her very sizable barrel-shaped chest. Nevertheless, it was a good hug. I remember I had to rest up for several days before my sprained ankle eventually healed, but after Acorn's savvy application of those pressed flowers, the swelling went down in my ankles very swiftly. Ironically, shortly after encountering Acorn again, my brother and I began to watch programs on television all about an elusive North American creature known as Bigfoot, and we quickly discerned that Acorn was in fact a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. From what we could fathom, we were incredibly lucky to have such personal interaction with one of these creatures that we looked upon as a friend. Many people on the television were describing Sasquatches as very smelly, but Acorn did not smell bad at all. In fact, I know of people that smell much more pungent than she ever did, in particular a girl at school that stunk to high heaven after sports games. I think Acorn smelt rather like a domestic house cat that's been rolling around in the dust and dirt on the driveway. You can smell the earth on her fur. I would describe it as an earthy smell, really rather like that. We also heard that people were terrified of Sasquatches or Bigfoot, which surprised us as we didn't find Acorn at all scary. But then we decided that on reflection, Acorn was probably quite scary to look at. It's just that we knew that she wasn't a scary creature, so we didn't perceive her like that. Think about it, said my brother. Acorn is massive and covered in hair. Imagine if you didn't know her like we do. You would think you were being approached by a monster. I suppose you're right, I said. I hadn't thought of it like that. One day on the neighbouring farm adjacent to our home, Mr. Livingston, a farmer who'd been a friend of our family's over many long years, decided to cut down a vast woodland area with the full intention of bulldozing and flattening the land to create a substantial clearing so that they could build holiday cabins for tourists visiting Ketham, as the tourism industry was booming and it was an excellent way to secure extra income. It would seem the moment that Mr. Livingston workers began felling the trees on the land, the tree fellers were continuously handing in their notice and refusing to work on the site. But they weren't willing to elaborate on their stories and seemed rather cagey about the incidents and unwilling to talk about why they had randomly chosen to throw in their notices. "I've never heard so many crazy excuses in all my life," Mr. Livingston complained. "I'm just asking your men to cut down a grove of trees, and they're making a mountain out of a molehill about the job. Why is everyone giving in their notice all of a sudden? I don't understand. It's completely crazy. You need to hang around on site with my men and see what's going on with them," suggested the manager of the project. "Something doesn't want us to take down those trees, and it's giving my men a very hard time. My men have families to support, but they're not prepared to put their necks on the line for a job like yours. It's not worth their while." Farmer Livingston thought the men were making pathetic, unreasonable excuses, but he soon changed his mind when he began assisting one of the tree fellers in taking down a tree, as a huge rock came flying in his direction, missing him by centimetres. He was outraged and appalled by this incident, as he knew that he could have potentially been seriously injured. The workers admitted that they had felt threatened and intimidated by a couple of very angry Bigfoot on the site, who had been screaming at them and throwing rocks. The men were terrified and didn't want to continue with their jobs, but had been embarrassed to admit that the Bigfoots had been their contentious issue. When my brother and I heard about the trouble that Farmer Livingston was having on his farm with a couple of very aggressive Bigfoot, we decided to pay him an impromptu visit. We knew that Acorn was a Bigfoot, and she would never ever intentionally hurt anyone, so there had to be a very good reason that the Bigfoots didn't want the tree felling to proceed. "Hello, Mr. Livingston," I said. "We've heard all about your troubles with Bigfoot, and we came along to see if we could help." "You've heard about my problems, have you?" said Mr. Livingston. "Well, what am I going to do? No one wants to take down these trees of mine. The tree fellers simply refuse to work. I've had such huge plans for the cabins that I wanted to build here, and my dream is all coming apart at the seams. It would seem I have a couple of savage Bigfoot on my land who are intent on causing grievous harm to the workers and scaring them half to death." "Well, maybe there's a good reason they don't want you to build the cabins here," I told Farmer Livingston. "My brother and I personally know a Bigfoot living in these parts called Acorn. Granted, she is big and scary looking and covered in long dark brown hair. I'd say she's easily 800 pounds and 8 foot tall and possibly even 3 foot wide, but she hasn't got a mean bone in her body. I can promise you of that. If her kind are lashing out at your men, there has to be a good reason for it, because they are by nature benevolent and evasive. So much so, in fact, that we don't even know the members of Acorn's family. That's how quiet and shy these creatures usually are. Acorn's always been friendly towards us, but she befriended us when we were very young, and I think that makes a difference." Farmer Livingston looked at me with a befuddled expression on his face. "You mean you're friends with a Bigfoot?" he said, looking absolutely appalled. "If I had my way, I would kill the whole lot of them. Do your parents know about this?" "Absolutely not," I said, "and I would never tell them either, because they would never understand such an incongruous friendship." "Well, maybe you can find out for me why these Bigfoot are causing me so much grief. It's despicable that these creatures are trying to harm my workers." "We'll try to find out what's going on," I assured him. "Last time I saw Acorn was about 2 months ago, after I fell off my horse, and she helped me get back home safely. My brother and I will call her and see if she comes to us, as she knows her name. But she may not be there, because Bigfoots do move around from place to place all the time." When my brother and I returned home, we ventured out to the wooded area on our land, where we'd first encountered Acorn when we were very small, and we called out her name. Imagine our incredible surprise when we could hear Acorn's heavy footfall, along with her familiar whistling, and we knew she had answered our call. I was so happy to see her again that I hugged her impulsively, and she looked thrilled to see us as well. and then I pointed to Farmer Livingston's farm and began to mime men taking down trees and having stones hurled at them by her people. I could see that Acorn knew exactly what I was saying, and she became animated and frustrated because she couldn't articulate what she wanted to say in words. She began to draw vigorously in the ground, and from what I could discern by her drawings, she was saying that generations of Bigfoot were buried in those woods, and they didn't want the graves of their people decimated. When my brother and I went to visit Mr. Livingston, we told him what Acorn had revealed to us about the wooded area on his property, and we were surprised by his generous reaction. "Now I understand," he said, stroking his moustache thoughtfully. "I will not build the cabins on a burial ground. That would be sacrilege. And besides, I'm superstitious about such things. No good ever came from digging up grave sites, as even the land does not thank you for it. It's all about the energy, you know. I have a greater respect for these Bigfoot, for it seems that they have human emotions. For indeed, if someone were digging up my dead ancestors and wanting to build cabins over their resting places, I would possibly also start throwing stones at the offender in much the same way. I do get it, you know." "So you're not going to build your cabins there?" I asked in amazement. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Livingston. On behalf of all the Bigfoot, I really believe they'll appreciate your sensitivity to this matter." "Of course I understand, Claudia," piped Farmer Livingston. "I have too much respect for the dead, I really do. I know an old friend of mine who built properties over a cemetery. Biggest mistake of his life, and no good ever came from that endeavour. I gather he disturbed the graves and relocated their bones, and then he built the new development there. I learnt that those houses were perpetually haunted, and people who lived there all died in mysterious circumstances. Finally, a fire broke out mysteriously and burnt down all the houses to the ground. The land didn't even want the buildings there, and some people even said that the land groaned." "Well, I can see why you've changed your mind," I said. "That's certainly quite a story." We were so thrilled to hear that Mr. Livingston decided to build the cabins on one of his open meadows, which was a far better idea anyway. He never had any problems with angry Sasquatch after that. One day he even informed us that he'd received dozens of pretty gemstones on his doorstep, which he believed were a gift from the Bigfoot, thanking him for his kindness in abandoning the project. I really sensed that Mr. Livingston had a healthy new respect for the creature. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, have you ever watched a male praying mantis copulate with a female? And as this passionate interaction takes place, the male praying mantis gets eaten alive by the female, as they engage in this treacherous union that always ends with deadly consequences. For some reason, the male praying mantis thinks losing himself to certain death is worth his while, just to have this one moment of intimacy with the ruthless female who has no mercy, so that they can reproduce together. This is the male praying mantis's quintessential opportunity to mate with a female praying mantis, and it ends with a devastating finality. It really is brutal, but who ever said that life was fair? I hasten to say that this is exactly what happened to me with Alexia Muldooney, who was not unsimilar in her dealings with me as the female praying mantis. Indeed, I would go so far as to say the comparison is rather appropriate. However, I never got the opportunity of being intimate with her. She made sure that that never happened. You see, Alexia Muldooney will throw you a carrot. Then she will take it away from you, or tease a dog with some juicy fillet steak, and then eat it all up herself. What I say to man-eaters like Alexia Muldooney is that not all men will allow themselves to be eaten alive by their female lover. Some of us just ain't going to sit back and take it. And I know for one thing, I certainly won't. You picked the wrong man here to have your fun with, Alexa, I'm afraid. You better watch out, love. You ain't got a clue what's coming your way. And I hate to say this,
but it ain't going to do that pretty face of yours any favours. It's funny how accidents can so easily happen when you least expect them to. You may have spat me out after you'd finished with me, but it ain't over until the fat lady sings. Just one word of advice to you, Alexa Muldooney. Be very careful who you're dealing with. If you swim with the sharks, you're very much going to get bitten. So, word of advice for you, love. Watch yourself. It's not going to be very pleasant for you to dive into the water with your eyes wide open. For you might be very sorry, my girl. There are lots of nasty surprises lurking beneath the dark, treacherous water that might unexpectedly pounce on you unawares, and one of them might very well be me. And if you think sharks are dangerous, love, well, you ain't seen anything yet. Ostensibly, you were quite the fool to lead me up the garden path in the dispassionate way that you did, making me falsely believe that there was hope and a bright future for the both of us. You were nothing more than a tease. I guess you were excited about writing to a criminal like myself who was in prison for violent crime. Why do so many women get off on that? I've never understood it myself. It's like they like bad boys, don't they? It titillates and teases their darkest fantasies. You believed I was incarcerated for life, didn't you, Alexa? It made you feel safe to write to me, didn't it? You believed I was never going to get out, so you could toy with my emotions unabashedly, make me believe you loved me. You got some kind of a cheap kick from writing to a bad guy in prison like myself for over 4 long years. I could sense your excitement when I told you about the crimes I committed. You wanted all the details, didn't you? I had to exaggerate some of them to give you an even greater rush. I knew hearing of such things that I professed to have done was for you like getting high on magic mushrooms. The truth was my crimes were pretty unexciting and rather mundane, but the less said about that the better. I don't want to hark back on the past, do I? One thing about you is you underestimated me, Alexa, I'm afraid. That's the problem with women like yourself. All those shameless love letters you wrote me, that you declared your undying love to me in. What was it you wrote, Alexa, exactly? Let's see. I've got the letter here. Let me just open it up for a second. Yes, here your words are. I'm going to make you very accountable for them, I'm afraid. Words are dangerous, you know. They can be like flying shrapnel, because they can cause deadly harm. I love you so very much. I just so wish we could be together forever and ever. My heart is all yours. Don't ever forget that for a second. Don't you worry, Alexa Muldooney. I haven't forgotten that for a second. And I will hold you to your promise. You told me you belonged to me, didn't you? One thing you failed to realize about me, Alexa, that I was not sentenced to life imprisonment, and that was the good news I chose not to share with you freely. Yes, I had been in prison for violent crime, but I never actually killed anyone in that incident. So the court thankfully had mercy on me. And of course I got out earlier for good behaviour. I was described as a transformed prisoner who had found God. The last part, of course, was never true. But one can be creative with the truth, can't one? And it never did me any harm to make them believe that. What you never fully anticipated or appreciated, Alexa, was that one day I was going to come out of prison. And as you had said, we would live together happily ever after, like they do in the fairy tales. But it turned out that our love story was just a farce, wasn't it? It was a story without substance, depth, or any staying power. It was flaky and insincere. just like you, Alexa Muldooney. You led me astray, didn't you, with your false promises? You thought you could play with fire and not get burnt, didn't you? You thought you could put your finger through the tiger enclosure without getting bitten. You thought that the untamed tiger would never get out of his enclosure. But little did you know he would. And when he did, he would seek you out and make you fully accountable for all the lies you told him, all the coquettish, flirtatious, and insincere promises you so easily made to me that you knew never needed to be fulfilled. Because as far as you were concerned, I was safely locked behind prison bars for life, so you could tease me without experiencing the consequences of your silly little juvenile games. You were the temptress seducing me, were you not? Isn't it funny how when I told you I was being released from prison, that I couldn't wait for us to start living our lives together, what did you do? You poured ice-cold water onto our budding romance and on the love you professed to feel for me. The moment you learnt I was being released from prison, you began to panic quite significantly about all the lies you had fed me over the years, all the hopes you had indiscriminately thrown my way like meaty bones to a starving dog. All I have been to you all along was some kind of warped, dark fantasy that you could play with, like a cat toying with a mouse. Once you learnt I was coming out of prison, how your letters changed, did they not? You became aloof, insouciant, very distant. Your letters sounded as if you were writing to the local authority about a problem with a pedestrian crossing. What did those mean-spirited letters say to me? Oh, yes, that you'd never loved me, that our relationship could never work, that it was only a bit of fun. Only a bit of fun? Are you kidding me, Alexa? Is that how you view it? All I was to you was only a bit of fun, after you'd sworn your undying love to me. How can you give a man hope and tear it away from him so frivolously, like a page in a book that means absolutely nothing? Some men might take that kind of abysmal treatment lying down, but not me. Every day when I got up in the morning in my pitiful little cell, you, Alexa, were the one thing that gave me a reason to face another day. You led me to believe that one day, if I got out, we would be together. And then you do this to me. You spat me out with your dirty bathwater, as if I was nothing. Did you really think I would take this all lying down? Are you kidding me? Is this some kind of a joke? I'm not a pussycat, Alexa. I'm an untamed, dangerous, wild animal, and no one takes a bite out of me and gets away with it. Sorry, Alexa, but this pussycat you've been playing with has lethal claws and sharp teeth that can tear you apart limb from limb. So I'm coming for you, girl. I'm coming for you. You wrongly assumed that just by moving away from your old residential address in downtown Atlanta, that I wouldn't be able to trace you, that I wouldn't know where you lived. You thought I wouldn't be able to track you down, didn't you? More fool you. You are ignorant as well as callow, Alexa, but that suits me just fine. It wouldn't be very great for me if you were as sharp as a double-edged sword, but you aren't. You, Alexa, are about as blunt and as naive as they come, although you do rather fancy yourself as a woman of the world. But you underestimated me, Alexa Muldooney. You assumed you were clever, didn't you? Hurriedly deleting all your Facebook profiles, retracting your footprint from all social media. You were very fearful that I would come after you, weren't you, Alexa? Fearful that I would find you. You were right about that. You do need to be afraid, very afraid, because Alexa, I'm waiting and I'm watching you. I'm biding my time. I'm not hungry enough to strike at you yet, but I'm getting there very quickly. And when I'm ravenous enough, that is when I will drag you down like a hefty crocodile into the water, and you will not see me coming. I know all about you, Alexa. I've been following you around, studying you like a school project. There is nothing about you I don't know now. You're like an open book to me. Have you not felt eyes burning into your back when you're shopping at the grocery store or crossing the road? Have you felt as if you've been watched all the time? If you haven't sensed you've been followed, then you're not very observant, my girl. It was all very convenient for me. Everything fitted perfectly into place. The apartment next to yours went up for rent, and I persuaded my sister Jane to rent the place, so that I could have a lookout point, so that I could watch your comings and goings, and keep close tabs on you, Alexa. My sister Jane was looking for a nice place, so I nudged her in the right direction, and bingo, she took the apartment. Isn't it amazing how life can fit so perfectly together, so seamlessly, when you least expect it to do so? You made this so terribly easy for me, Alexa. Very easy indeed. I'm privy to all your sacred daily routines, sunbathing in the late afternoon on your patio, about 9 stories above the ground. It's quite a steep drop, don't you think, Alexa? When you told me you were a gymnast once, I didn't believe you. I thought you were exaggerating ever so slightly. But I take it all back. When I saw you doing a handstand on your balcony railing early in the morning, a ritual you seem to do before you go to work, along with a few yoga stretches on that mat of yours, well, I thought I was seeing double, didn't I? But there you were, Alexa, larger than life, doing a handstand on the patio railings without any fear of the steep drop below you. You've got to be kidding me. Who does that? But then I remembered that they broke the mold when they made you, as nobody normal would exercise on the end of a sheer cliff face. No one but you, Alexa Muldooney. My first thought was, is this woman completely crazy? When I saw you doing these idiosyncratic practices, I could not believe my good fortune. You're making this very easy for me, Alexa, easier than I ever anticipated. Has it not occurred to you that it would take just one little gentle push from that railing when you're doing a handstand, that you would fall to your death without any problems at all? I wonder, would anybody be surprised by that? I don't think so. Many of the residents have seen you doing a handstand on your railings. Many have advised you not to do this practice. But one thing I've noticed about you, Alexa, if someone tells you not to do something, you become quite bloody-minded, don't you? Incredibly contrary. You never listen to well-meaning advice, because you always know better. You're quite arrogant like that, I think. It's like you get off putting yourself at great risk, like those people that get a thrill out of bungee jumping. But lucky for them, they have a safety harness, don't they? It ensures they don't fall to their certain deaths. But you, Alexa, on the other hand, don't have any protection. And you know what, Alexa? I think I'm beginning to understand the workings of your mind a lot more, Alexa. There's a part of you that loves to live dangerously. That's why you started writing to me in prison. It's all about putting yourself at risk. It gives you some kind of an endorphin rush, does it not? Why, even my own sister, living in the flat next door to yours, warned you against such outlandish behaviour. I don't think you should do handstands on those railings, she told you. What if you slipped and fell? You'd never survive a drop like that. But you practically laughed in her face, did you not? She told me as much, you know. You seem to think you're invincible, don't you, Alexa? But I'm here to tell you that you're definitely not. Do you know your cockiness is admirable? I'll give you that. One thing I will say about you unequivocally is that you do have a very high regard for yourself. You said to my sister with a seriousness of note, which suggested you believed your own lies. Not me. I'm nimble. I was a gymnast when I was at school. I've been keeping up these exercises ever since, and I've never ever fallen once. But Alexa, there's always a first time, is there not? Well, I've got news for you, Alexa. You're not invincible. No one is, I'm afraid. You're made out of flesh like the rest of us, and you'll find out about that soon enough. I hate to say this to you, but your body ain't going to look terribly pretty once you fall from those railings onto the concrete floor of the courtyard below. When I think of all the effort you've put in to look so good, all the calorie counting you've done over the years, the rigorous workouts, the surgical procedures, the Botox and fillers, and all that sunbathing. You've invested so much in your appearance. And all for what, Alexa? It breaks my heart to think what you will look like once the funeral director places you into that wooden box. Even he won't be able to look at you without growing green at the gills and having to clandestinely rush to the Johnny to vomit up the contents of his stomach. Poor, poor man. My heart bleeds for him. They'll have to keep the box shut permanently to spare your vanity. You wouldn't want to be seen dead looking like that. You get the joke, Alexa. You cannot say I don't have a great sense of humour. My sister Jane Goodlington warned you that you could accidentally slip from the railings, as I keep saying. She warned you about the dangers of excessive tanning. My sister was looking out for you, was she not? Why she bothered to warn you about the blindingly obvious, God only knows. You were right about one thing, though, Alexia. I'll give you that. You really won't have to worry about malignant melanoma or any deadly skin cancer, for you will never be afflicted by the disease. How do I know? It's obvious, isn't it? You're going to exit this planet with a dramatic impact no one will see coming, and I can guarantee you that. If you fell from your balcony, no one would even raise an eyebrow. The big question I ask myself is, would anybody miss you? Would anybody shed a tear for you? No, I don't think so. Apart from the skank of a daughter of yours. And I'm sorry, but she really is a skank. It's true. Do they not say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? Mind you, your daughter didn't come out of the same cereal packet as you did. Her cereal packet was designed for Halloween. Yours was designed for little girls with a fixation on Barbie and the colour pink. As for that skank of a daughter of yours, she's a scary one to look at. She could be pretty if she abandoned those Halloween costumes she wears every day. Personally, I've never been partial to young women wearing black lipstick and having more than half a dozen earrings in one earlobe. I may have come out of prison, but I still appreciate femininity when I see it in a woman. And all those piercings are overkill, if you ask me, especially on a young lady like your daughter, if you can call her that. You must have really turned your daughter off the idea of being feminine. Poor thing, she didn't stand a chance, did she, with you as a mother, because she didn't want to look like you at all. So she did a complete 180. And who can blame her for that? That poor, poor sorry girl. She didn't want to bear any resemblance to you, did she? You're a pretty veneer, aren't you, Alexa? But when you look too closely, you get to see all the imperfections, all the cracks that lie beneath the sorry surface. I will admit the golden tan does hide a multitude of imperfections, does it not? But going back to your poor daughter, what's her name again? Sophia, that's right. She has my deepest sympathies. I mean, honestly, with a mother like you, is there any hope? Your daughter was doomed from the very start, and her boyfriend Carpenter. Well, let's not get started with him. That teenager looks very shady, if you ask me. I wouldn't be surprised if he shoplifts on the weekends. He's shifty looking, but too shifty to get caught, I suspect. I know his type rather well. I've been in prison long enough to be able to pick his type out from a crowd. The type that gets incarcerated for petty theft or drug dealing that goes badly wrong. You're a terrible mother, Alexa. I'm a sorry witness to this tragic fact. Women like you were never meant to have children. My guess is your poor daughter Sophia is an illegitimate child. You probably don't even know who her father is, as men have come and gone in your life as frequently as the buses on the interstate. If you had been a better mother, I may have had more pity on you. But regretfully, my pity has worn thin. Your girl is only 16 years old, and what a cross she has to bear, being raised by a mother like you, who is only interested in herself. It's a pity you don't devote more attention to Sophia, as you do to yourself. Then the poor girl wouldn't be so lost, and attracting loser boyfriends like Carpenter into her life. Tell me, Alexa, if you were to succumb to an unfortunate accident, would any of the men you've wooed over the years be remotely sad about your loss? I don't think so. You haven't got any men caught up in your web at the moment. It's a sorry-skinned month for you on the boyfriend front, isn't it, Alexa? Alas, there are no rich pickings for you at the moment, so there will be no devastated lovers left behind to pick up the pieces after you're gone. Oh dear, my heart bleeds for you, poor Alexa. The girl who lived fast and died young. You're 41 years old, aren't you? That still makes you reasonably young as far as I'm concerned, although if you don't mind my saying so, with all the sunbathing you've been doing, your skin is pretty leathery these days, and there is no amount of Botox or fillers that can fix a complexion like that. I am told close up that you're battling lots of fine lines around the eye and mouth area. I wonder if any of your rejected ex-boyfriends or your 3 ex-husbands will show up for your funeral, Alexa. I seriously doubt it. What is the preacher going to do when he gives the eulogy? What will he say about you and your life? Ah, yes, she was selfish, self-centered, a bitch, a man-eater. But she had a killer body, a first-class tan, so that's got to count for something, hasn't it? Getting back to your fixation on sunbathing, Alexa, I've never seen anything like it before. I do wonder how much Coppertone you slather all over your slim, lanky, shapely body. I bet you keep the manufacturers in business. I've watched you on your sun lounger, lapping up the sun rather decadently, like a kitten might enjoy a saucer of milk. I've seen you posing shamelessly in your dark Gucci sunglasses, drinking a margarita and scanning a fashion magazine, as you idle away the long lonely hours listening to some trendy music with your earphones on. I will admit this. I've got to give this to you. Your tan is fantastic. You don't take any shortcuts, do you, on that score? What did you say to my sister, Jane? Ah, yes. I'd rather have a tan and get cancer than go around looking pale and sickly. My sister, Jane, is a nurse. She's seen arrogant, cocky people like you before, who believe you will live forever. You don't care about the risks you're subjecting yourself to. You will do anything for the sake of beauty, and there are no half measures with you. Yes, I've watched you sunbathing topless on your patio, when the weather's good, wearing the skimpiest of bikinis I've ever seen. I never knew they could make anything that small. I suspect it cost you a fortune to buy a bikini like that. But how can people shamelessly charge so much for something when there's barely any fabric on the item in question that they're trying to sell? It's a little like the emperor with no clothes on, who spent a vast fortune on going around naked, believing he was wearing the finest clothes that money could buy, when in reality he was wearing nothing at all. Yes, I watch you all the time, Alexa. I have the lens of my binoculars focused on your sun lounger in the late afternoons. I see everything. I'm very lucky because I'm in a position on my sister's balcony where you would struggle to even observe me. Thank God my sister's at work all the time, so she can't see me spying on you. That sort of thing would absolutely disgust her. I've been in prison for a long time, and I'm not adverse to enjoying a bit of eye candy when I see it. Although this one is a little worse for wear, I have to say. Like a chocolate that's got thrashed around on the conveyor belt at the factory and ended up with some nasty bumps in the packaging. The trouble is, Alexia, your vanity and self-obsession knows no bounds. There is one thing I know about you, and that is you have no shame. You let it all hang out, don't you? You know you look good, don't you, Alexa? You want everybody to see you. There's a touch of outrageous voyeurism in you. I suspect you enjoy being looked at, being the centre of everyone's attention. I noticed the other day you never even covered up when a helicopter flew close over your building. You actually waved at the pilot half naked, hoping he was having a jolly good look at you. I always wonder how many men you've been through, Alexa. I think about this all the time. I know you've been through a lot. I have an instinct about these things, you see. Nothing would surprise me about you. How you must be dreading the autumn, when you're deprived of those days when you can soak up the delicious warm sunshine like a salamander. By the looks of things, there are not many warm summer days left for you to work on that tan of yours. Oh dear, it is rather a pity, isn't it? I've also got to make the most of the time left, as my pity is running out for you fast, and I need to strike while the iron's hot. I don't think during the winter months you'll be doing your handstands on the railing somehow, especially if they're covered with ice. Even you are not that dim. Yes, I will give you this. You have some good points, Alexa. I will acknowledge that you wrote me some really loving letters in prison. Too bad they were so insincere. Do you know what? When you've been hanging around cockroaches for long enough, like I have, I know when an extermination order is due, and in your case it has long since expired, Alexa. So in a nutshell, I'm coming after you. Watch out. Alexa was so relieved to get back to her apartment, while there was still some late afternoon sunshine left to enjoy. She had been fantasizing about this all day. She loved nothing better than lying back luxuriantly on her sun lounger, soaking up the last remnants of the sunny offerings that the day invited, and drinking a margarita, of course. Regretfully, the late sun was getting so much more timid as autumn beckoned. Alexa absolutely despised autumn and winter. They were her quintessential worst times of the year, when instead of taking trips to her sun lounger on her patio to thoroughly enjoy the frivolity of spending lackadaisical, leisurely, indulgent hours in the sun, topping up her golden tan, she was sadly forced to acquire the tanning bed services of the less than glamorous place in town. The tan did not come cheap, nor was it close to what she acquired on the balcony at her apartment. Besides, what fun was there, lying in a room, on a horrible bed, with a nasty light, and having to wear goggles on your eyes for protection? People were always asking Alexa about her perfect tan. "Have you been somewhere sunny and warm?" they would say, with a hint of envy etched in their voices, falsely assuming that she'd been on a tropical cruise somewhere, warm and beautiful, drinking back exotic cocktails under a setting sun. If only. Alas, Alexa's budget didn't stretch that far. Most of her available funds were secured for investing in her good looks. No one appreciated how expensive it was to continually look good, and Alexa's beauty routine certainly did not come cheap. One thing was for certain, she was never going to age gracefully. That was completely overrated as far as she was concerned. She would shamelessly do everything possible to hold back the hands of time. Too bad she hadn't seduced a plastic surgeon yet. Someone like that would be enormously useful to have on board at this stage of her life. Imagine the savings for all the nips and tuck treatments she would acquire. The tummy tucks, the liposuction, and of course the inevitable facelifts. The celebrities did it all the time, did they not? To look as young as they possibly could. And what was good for the goose was also good for the gander. Heavens, no! Alexa would chuckle. I work on my tan enormously hard, you know, when I get home every afternoon after work. I'd never get a tan like this in one of those tanning beds in town. Absolutely not. Although I admit I employ their services in the winter as I don't have a choice. And as for those fake spray-on tans, well, they're just too dreadful for words, aren't they? Let's not kid, after a week or so they begin to fade. No, I like to do things the old-fashioned way, with lots and lots of copper tone and plenty of direct exposure to the sun. Imagine the amount of vitamin D my body is generating. I can't remember the last time I had a cold or flu. My immune system is absolutely fantastic. I do get the vitamin D aspect of sunbathing, people would say to her. That's beneficial, of course it is. But aren't you worried about sunbathing in direct sunshine? I mean, you look great, of course you do, Alexa. Your tan is enviable, so golden and healthy looking. You're absolutely glowing. But what about skin cancer? Surely you're worried about getting that. I mean, spending so many hours in the sun without wearing sun protective factor. Isn't that asking for heaps of trouble? Alexa had frowned. She raised a brow, as if the very notion of skin cancer threatening her life at any point in time was bordering on the insane and ridiculous. In Alexa's mind, bad things always happened to other people, never to her. Cancer was a filthy, dirty word that she never wanted to acquaint with her life. She resented anyone daring to utter it to her. People did it all the time, didn't they? This gives you cancer, that gives you cancer, the next thing gives you cancer. It's like everything gives you cancer. It was absolutely sickening, and she didn't need to listen to this negative spin. If you lived like that with such a gloomy prognosis over your own life, well, you might as well bury yourself under a rock like a crab and wait for a predator to eat you up. I'm not worried about that, Alexa had snorted dismissively. That's never going to happen to me. Besides, cancer doesn't run in my family. I've got excellent genes in that regard. My grandmother lived to be over 100, she said proudly. That woman smoked every single day of her life and practically lived outdoors without wearing sun protective factor on an inch of her body. And she was absolutely fine. No problems at all. The very worst of Alexa's critics was that annoying woman who had moved into the flat next door to her. The woman had laid into her heart about her sunbathing rituals. What was her name again? Oh yes, Jane Goodlington. With a name like that, was it any surprise that that goody two-shoes of a woman, who looked as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, would have an opinion over absolutely everything? You know the type. Jane Goodlington was a nurse, working long, exhausting shifts at the Piedmont Atlanta Hospital, situated on 275 Collier Road. Alexa knew the hospital well. She'd been to the accident and emergency there once for treatment for a bee sting, and returned home with a hefty bill. One thing for sure was she was never going to go to the ER again in a hurry, if she could help it. The charges were excessive and ate out of her budget. Jane Goodlington was so irritating, the kind of woman that lightly henpecked everyone within an inch of their lives. As far as Alexa was concerned, it was none of the woman's business what she personally did with her spare time. If she wanted to sunbathe all day long, that was her decision, and her decision alone, not anybody else's business. She hated it when people poked their big fat noses into her affairs. It was rather unfortunate that Jane Goodlington's patio happened to overlook Alexa's, so Jane could see everything that Alexa got up to, which was a tad annoying, but it couldn't be helped. She felt sorry for the people at the hospital, having Jane Goodlington hanging around them, attending to their every need, delighting in giving them injections and all those ghastly, awful medications that people have to take, and practically breathing over them like Puffy the Magic Dragon. She first met Jane Goodlington when on one blissfully pleasant sunny afternoon, Alexa had been lying on her sun lounger with her large hat shading her face and her eyes shut behind designer dark glasses that she'd been wearing. All of a sudden she heard a little small voice that sounded like the voice you would expect to hear from the little people. Alexa half expected to look down on her sun lounger and see a small person the size of Tom Thumb looking up at her earnestly, but that is not what she saw. "Excuse me," came the tiny faraway voice that Alexa wondered if she'd actually heard it. Alexa only ever had one earphone plugged into her ear. She liked to be aware of any other sounds she might hear, beyond the upbeat music she tended to listen to, like the sound of her daughter Sophia returning home to the apartment after school, or some of the extracurricular activities she enjoyed. Alexa wondered if she'd heard right, but then she heard the little voice again. And the tiny voice did not belong to a little person. It belonged to a big, voluptuous woman wearing a nurse's uniform, who was leaning over the patio and calling out to her. Alexa frowned. The woman was like a great big luminescent wasp flying over her sweet drink that she'd very much like to swat away if given the chance. What did this nauseating woman want with her? Why wouldn't she just go away and leave her alone? Alexa removed her sunglasses, and the blazing glare of the sunlight meant it was almost impossible to see the woman very clearly. But she did observe the woman's rather frumpy silhouette with a great measure of displeasure. Alexa looked up at the woman with a sulky pout on her face that she did not conceal. But Jane Goodlington didn't appear to notice. As a nurse, she probably met all kinds of people and was used to those that were a little on the temperamental side. "I'm your next-door neighbour. I moved here a month ago. I'm single now. I was married about 2 years ago, but I'm now divorced, and I don't intend to get married again. The name's Jane Goodlington. I was looking forward to meeting you, but I wasn't expecting it to be like this. I'm very sorry to intrude on you." "Nice to meet you, Jane," said Alexa rather tightly, gritting her teeth as she stared at her neighbour. "My name is Alexa," she said suddenly, realizing it would probably be impolite not to extend some neighbourhood pleasantries. It wouldn't do to get off on a bad start with her next-door neighbour. You heard bad stories, didn't you, on the internet all the time, about people having blazing rows with their next-door neighbours? And Alexa didn't want that to happen to her. She liked the peaceful life. The last thing she wanted was a neighbour leaving dead rats at her front doorstep, or stuffing leaves through her letterbox. She needed to humour this woman, even if it killed her to do so. Alexa sat up and placed a rather insincere, watery smile on her face, and gave Jane Goodlington her undivided attention for a moment. "Yes," she said, raising a well-manicured brow. "I hope you don't mind if I don't agree. I think some of my patients that have had malignant melanoma and have luckily survived, if they were to speak to you, they would tell you to get out of the sun. You're asking for trouble. They say the sun has changed exponentially over recent years, you know. It's not like it was in the 70s and 80s. I think the UV radiation is coming down to Earth fiercer than ever before, and it's not kind on our skins. People didn't get cancer in the 70s and 80s like they do now. It's a fact. The sun is different these days. That's why skin cancer rates are rampant in places like New Zealand and Australia. Holland as well, I believe. Let's just say it's a lethal condition. There are other ways you can get a tan, are there not? It's worth exploring those options if you ask me." "Oh, you're talking about spray tans, are you?" said Alexa in disgust. "Been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and no thank you very much." "Don't dismiss those things out of hand," said Jane. You go into a cubicle wearing your bikini and the spray tans come on. You walk away with a fabulous tan without putting yourself at any risk, and you have it in seconds, literally. I've gone down that route myself when I went on holiday to Hawaii with some of my girlfriends. I didn't want to look anemic on the beach in my swimming costume. My tan was amazing, you know. I was thrilled with the results. For your information, I'm not putting myself at risk, Alexa insisted. I take very good care of my skin, and I don't believe I will ever get cancer. I get checked regularly by my dermatologist, and I have great genes. Well, I'm very glad to hear you are seeing a dermatologist. That's good news. I do sincerely hope you never get skin cancer. Maybe you really are one of the lucky ones, Alexa, and I'm not disputing that for a second. Look, I don't want to dictate to you what you do with your life by interfering and being a busybody. Far from it, in fact. I just wanted to warn you, that's all. The woman paused for a brief moment, looking moderately uncomfortable, and then said, There's something else I noticed, if you don't mind my commenting about it, that concerns me. More than your sunbathing, actually. Which is why I felt the urgent need to speak to you about this matter. Look at me, she chuckled. I sound like a headmistress of a school, don't I? But I am looking out for you, so please don't take offence. It's just well-meaning advice from me, and it's coming from a good place. It's just I would never forgive myself if anything untoward were to happen to you. Yes, said Alexa, raising a brow, sensing another lecture was coming her way. Why wouldn't this irritating woman leave her alone and just get lost? Well, I notice you have a rather outlandish habit of doing handstands on the balcony railings. When I saw you doing that, I hasten to say I was completely gobsmacked. Never seen anything like it before in my life. I kept thinking, does this woman have a death wish or something? I've never seen anyone attempt such a courageous but risky thing before. Very impressive, of course. Your handstands are flawless, but I just wish you wouldn't do them on the balcony railings. It's not safe. You could easily slip over the edge and fall off. It's very dangerous. A fall from this height would almost certainly kill you. It terrifies me to see you doing a thing like this. I actually hasten to say I held my breath when I saw you do that. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. I wondered if you were a stunt woman for a television show or something. I did wonder about that quite a lot. It's just regular folk don't do stuff like this. But I can see that there's nothing regular about you, Alexa, and I mean that as a compliment. Oh, don't worry about me, said Alexa, giving Jane a wink. I was a gymnast as a girl, you see. I like to keep myself nimble. I've been doing handstands on balcony railings all my life, with no problems whatsoever. Even my parents never worried about my daring stunts. At first it scared them half to death, of course, and then they knew I wouldn't do anything if it wasn't actually safe to do. I admit it does seem risky to a casual observer who doesn't know me like yourself, but I can assure you I wouldn't do it if I wasn't completely confident of my ability to master the move. I assure you I do not have a death wish on me. I do admit it when I perform the stunt. It does give me a bit of a head rush, but I assure you I wouldn't do it if I thought for a single second it was dangerous. Or if I could potentially fall to my death. You see, when I do the handstands, if I flop over on the banister, I hang there and I pull myself over. So I'm not going to fall off it. Well, that's a relief, said Jane. Look, I know I'm sounding like a hen-pecking person, but I just don't want you to hurt yourself, that's all. It freaked me out to see you like that, in that compromising position, but you did look like an acrobat or a circus performer, I hasten to say. You're very lean and obviously incredibly strong. But you do realize that accidents can happen to any of us. I see it all the time at the hospital. There is another thing I needed to tell you about. This time Jane's face flushed bright red, as if she was personally embarrassed about something. It's just my brother. Now, he spends a lot of time at my apartment. Sometimes he behaves like a teenager, you see. He's in his late 40s, and would you believe it? Actually, he was the one that encouraged me to rent this place, and I'm so very glad I did. The apartment block here is absolutely stunning, is it not? Unfortunately for you, on my balcony, I can see everything you do on your patio. My brother, well, he won't be adverse to having a good old look at you if you're sunbathing topless. You're a very good-looking woman, Alexa, if you don't mind my saying so, but I'm very sure you know that. I know exactly what my brother's like. He's got a bit of a wandering eye, you see, a bit of a ladies' man, and I'm sure you don't want to be ogled by him. If I know him like I do well enough, I don't think he'd be adverse to clandestinely watching you in a state of undress, even at his age. I mean, he has posters over his walls of glamorous women in a state of undress, so no prizes for guessing what's on his mind 24/7. You know the type. Oh, don't worry about that, said Alexa, waving her hand dismissively. If your brother wants a cheap thrill from gawking at me, he's welcome. I don't care about that sort of thing. You know what they say, if you've got it, flaunt it. Well, I am rather relieved to hear you say that, said Jane, because knowing my brother, he's probably been looking at you without your knowing for quite a while now. I thought I needed to say something before you freak out when you realise there's a perv living next door. Anyway, I'll leave you to it. I hope you'll think about my advice. I'm sure I'll see you around. Maybe one evening, perhaps, you could pop around for a light snack or so. I'm rather a good cook, and it's good to get to know your neighbours, isn't it? I'm not here a lot because I'm on nursing shifts, but I will be in touch to invite you and your daughter around. Sounds absolutely lovely, said Alexa with a grumble, thinking that it sounded anything but. She could imagine dinner with Jane Goodlington would be like attending a no-nonsense lecture in a headmistress's office, and no doubt her quirky behaviours would come under intense scrutiny again, and she didn't need that. Stupid, stupid woman, Alexa thought to herself, once Jane Goodlington had returned into her apartment. One thing was absolutely certain. Her neighbour was not exactly reticently shy in coming forward to express her opinion to a perfect stranger. She had heard it all before, of course. For goodness sake, why are people so damned morbid all the time? Can't they think of more positive, upbeat things, for goodness sake? Why were they so intent about squeezing the joy out of everything, like the water out of a sponge, so that life becomes dry and arid, like a pitiful desert, lacking any spark of life? You saw it on social media all the time, didn't you? People love to put a damper on life's simple joys. Sugar will kill you. Cigarettes are deadly. Coffee is unhealthy or healthy. They can't still decide on the answer to that one. Alcohol is just dreadful for your health. Everything is so bad for you. Alexa did not want to listen to all this stuff and nonsense, all this drivel, because if she did, she might as well be living on a desert island, spearing fish and living on coconuts. She enjoyed her cinnamon bun every morning, served with coffee, and those indulgences would always continue no matter what. As for the handstands that Alexa did on the balcony railings every morning, it was no big deal to her. She was agile like a cat, and people in the apartment block needed to accept that. Even her own daughter, Sophia, these days, was now beginning to get rather annoying, like the woman next door. These days she had a big gob on her that couldn't be closed unless you got it wired down permanently by the dentist. If Alexa could get the procedure done, she'd have paid for it herself, just to shut up her daughter. Who knew teenagers could be so annoying, like mosquitoes buzzing around you all the time, sucking the lifeblood out of you? There was no doubt that Sophia had not been remotely shy in saying some rather mean things to Alexa that had not been easy to listen to. It had been so nice when Sophia was all but a little girl. She'd been so sweet back in the day. A charming little thing she was. She wouldn't have said boo to a goose back then. The type of child that won the hearts of all the teachers and everybody believed was the perfect little angel. Boy, had times changed since then. Too bad children had to grow up. If Alexa could have kept her daughter Sophia at age 10 indefinitely, she'd almost certainly have been tempted to do so. Sophia had grown up far too fast. Where had the time gone to? She had now become a capricious, rather belligerent 16-year-old teenager. Forget sparing your feelings, because Sophia never held back on anything, she thought. Yet despite how nauseating her daughter had become, Alexa still loved the bones of her, even though she wasn't very good at showing it.
Ma'am, who are you kidding? You look like an old leather hide lying out there in the sun all day. It's embarrassing. When you sometimes come to pick me up at school, everybody asks what you've been doing. Have you been on holiday or something? Because you're so golden. I tell them you lie out on the patio all afternoon long, soaking up the sun like a salamander. People are genuinely shocked by that, Mum. You abuse your skin far too much.
Bully for them, snorted Alexa. Like I care what any of your friends think about me. I know I look good. I look fabulous, and that's all that matters.
Ma'am, you're in great shape. Yes, I'll give you that. But if you keep lying out in the sun in the way you do, you'll turn into a rhinoceros. And I'm not joking either. The skin on your face is thickening. It's aging fast, Mum. Haven't you seen the gathering of fine lines around your eyes and mouth area? And what about your hands? You've got age spots on them. There's a real possibility that you could get skin cancer. Why won't you listen to anybody? People are warning you because they're being kind. And I'm sorry, but I want to be around you for a long time. We had a lecturer coming to school the other day. Well, we gathered around together in assembly. They did a slideshow on skin cancer for us. It was scary stuff, Mum, but the school wanted to highlight to us the very big problem that cancer presents. I know if my friends go away, they always get a spray tan. They wear total sunblock on the beach. You'd do well to do the same.
Oh, not you two, lecturing me. For goodness sake, why is everybody doing it these days? I'll have you know, in South America, a lot of people roast on the beach, and they put sun oil all over their bodies, and nobody tells them off. But no, you want to do that to me. Make me feel awful about myself, and that's not very nice. I'm tired of this, Sophia. If you're going to start picking fault on me, I've got some things to say about you, young lady, that are far from pretty to hear. But since you're being so dreadfully candid, I will extend you the same courtesy.
Sophia snorted. Go on, then, say it. I can take it. I'm a big girl now. Unlike you, I'm not so quickly offended by everybody.
For a start, love, you are sickly pale, as white as a sheet if ever I saw one. You look like a goth, but then again you probably are. That's the whole idea, isn't it? I mean, how much black eyeliner do you wear? You look like a raccoon. And then you wear black nail varnish, black lipstick. Everything is black with you. Is there any other colour that actually exists in your wardrobe that isn't black? Then you're always wearing those black dresses and those black ripped jeans. And you often wear dresses with combat boots. Lace-up boots, for goodness sake, with a dress. It's ugly, love. Very, very ugly.
What do you know about fashion, Mum? Absolutely nothing, said Sophia dismissively. Our generation does things differently. It's quite hip to wear combat boots with a dress. Everybody does it. It's cool. You look as if you're stuck in a 1990s time warp.
Well, I will take that as a compliment, because let's not kid. In our generation, we had class and style, not like this generation that has no clue on how to dress.
Alexa was enjoying laying into her daughter. It was usually the other way round, and her daughter would pick her apart, but now it was her turn to go for the jugular.
Look at you, love. Sometimes I despair with the way you dress. Honestly, I really do. And what about all those piercings on your ears and in your nose and in your belly button? And the tattoos all over your arms? I mean, honestly, love, they're simply dreadful. There are no other words to describe them. I would hardly call them feminine. So you've decided to pick on my tattoos, have you, Mum? That's rich. I'll have you know they're very feminine. My generation likes tattoos. A lot of my friends have them. But then again, I wouldn't expect you to understand that. If you look at my arms, my tattoos are rarely pretty. They're covered in flowers and things like that. It looks like I'm wearing lace on my arms. It's prettier than having no decoration on your arms. My tattoos are rarely cool. Everybody says so. I designed them myself. Well, you think having stuff scribbled over your arms is attractive. It looks like you're wearing black pen marks all over yourself. I used to write on my arms, you know, if I wanted a boy's phone number, or to remember some of the answers to my tests. But at least I could wash all that stuff off. That stuff is stuck on you for good. And when you're old, it's not going to be very becoming, I hasten to tell you. You mark my words, you'll regret those tattoos one day. Everything is wrong with tattoos, love. Would I go putting bumper stickers all over a brand new Bentley? Absolutely not. I wouldn't dream of it. But you cover yourself up shamelessly with bumper stickers when you're wearing that permanent ink all over yourself. And what about that boyfriend of yours? He's no better, is he? I mean, honestly, love, where on earth did you find the likes of him? If you told me he came out of the dumpster with the potato peelings, I would absolutely believe you on that one. I don't think that young teenager has ever seen a barber a day in his life, and I'm not saying that to be unkind. All that messy, wild, untamed blonde hair, all over the place. And what about the clothes he wears? He looks like a punk rocker. You talk about me being unfashionable, but that look went out in the 80s. There's something very shifty about your boyfriend, Sophia. I hate to tell you this, love, but I just don't like him. Mum, my boyfriend actually has a name. It's Carpenter, unless you've forgotten. Carpenter. He dresses cool, Mum, and I love his wild hair. It makes him look like a surfer. Alexa let out an abrupt laugh. Is that what you call it, love? A surfer? No, you could fool me there. Do you know something? If I saw him crossing the street, walking towards me, do you know what I would do? I would cling to my purse very tightly. I'm just saying, love. Sophia frowned. At least I've been with Carpenter for over a year, and I'm only 16 years old. You're in your 40s, and you're lucky if you keep a man for just 2 weeks. Oh, is that how you're going to play it, Sophia? Very clever of you. For your information, I've had relationships that have lasted longer than a year. Have you forgotten I've been married for over 3 times? But at least I'm more discerning with my boyfriends than you are. Oh, really, Mum? You call yourself discerning? Well, what about the fact that you wrote to a guy who'd been in prison for violent crime for over 4 years? If I remember right, wasn't that the reason we moved to this apartment in a dreadful hurry? You were afraid of him coming out of prison and wanting to be with you. You were terrified the moment you learned he was coming out, because you thought he was there for life, didn't you? Not only that, but you were running scared, Mum. You got rid of your Facebook profiles and social media stuff. That was very different, love. It was only a bit of harmless flirtation on my part. I did it because he was in prison. I wasn't to know he was going to get out, was I? All right, I admit I enjoyed toying with him. But it was harmless. Well, so I thought. But out here in the big wide world, I would never foolishly date a man like that. Never. I've been around a lot longer than you, love, and I'm not trying to be unkind about Carpenter. But I don't like him. I think he's dodgy. He can't be trusted, love. Just so you know. You don't know anything about him, Mum. Nothing at all. What Alexa did not inform her daughter Sophia about was that everyone in the apartments knew that some parcels had gone missing from the janitor's office. Parcels that he'd taken in for the residents to pick up later on in the day. Someone with very sticky fingers had been pinching these parcels from him. Alexa would not be remotely surprised to find out it was her daughter's boyfriend, Carpenter. Ever since Carpenter had been hanging around the place, untoward things had happened. Someone was wantonly tossing McDonald's packages all over the place, so that the foyers smelt of potato chips and old cheeseburgers. Alexa was absolutely certain that Carpenter was the prime offender. The young man had absolutely no manners. Politeness was like a foreign language to him. People in this upmarket apartment block were naturally proud. No one would willingly toss out fast food wrappers and leave them to ferment in the foyer. Even the janitor had spoken privately to Alexa about the matter, asking her if she thought her daughter's new boyfriend had been responsible for tossing out the fast food packages. "Absolutely not," she had said to him, but deep down in her gut she suspected that Carpenter was guilty. But she still had her daughter's back, even if she didn't agree with her choice in boyfriends. Alexia knew she hadn't been the greatest mother to Sophia. Even she would be big enough to admit that. She could have done a lot better, but she was far too preoccupied and self-absorbed to give Sophia her undivided attention. Not that Sophia had really minded that. In the circumstances, was it any surprise that Sophia was dating a less than savoury character? Probably not. To be fair to Alexa, she had raised Sophia single-handedly by herself for 16 long years, and that's not to be sneezed at. She hadn't told her daughter anything about her real father, but she began to worry about the future. If something untoward should ever happen to her, then who would take care of Sophia? She knew she needed to address the issue with her daughter. This would not be a comfortable conversation to have with her daughter, but it would be a conversation that needed to be addressed for sure. "What are you talking about?" said Sophia, rolling her eyes in exasperation. "I thought you said you were invincible, Mum." "Don't be sarcastic, love. There's no need for it, and it really does not suit you. What I'm trying to say, Sophia, is if I should die accidentally, maybe one day, for example, I get run over by a bus, or end up in a ditch somewhere with my throat slit. Now, I know the chances are very remote, but it can happen. And in the circumstances, I need to make absolutely certain that you are taken care of. That's all. Is that so hard to understand? You are my responsibility, love, and your future needs to be secured." "Mum, you know what your problem is? You watch far too many of those true crime movies. I knew that was a mistake. You know nothing bad is going to happen to you. Where is this coming from? You're the most positive person I know. When people complain about your sunbathing, you don't bat an eyelash. And now you're talking like this. It's scaring me. Is there something you're not telling me? Something bad?" "Of course not, love. I'm not hiding anything from you at all. I'm absolutely fine, love. I'm in perfect physical health. It's just called being savvy, that's all. Having an insurance policy never hurt anyone, and it's a very good idea, should the worst ever happen." "Is that what they call it? An insurance policy?" said Sophia sarcastically. "Now, you know, love, I don't earn a lot of money at Silverstone's." "You do earn quite a lot of money, Mum, but you just spend it all on your beauty procedures, on food and rent for us. There's not usually much left over afterwards, that's all." "That's my point, love. Now, if anything bad were to happen to me, I would want to know you were taken well care of. I'm your mother, and I certainly would not rest easily in my grave if I knew you were struggling financially. I would hate to even contemplate that for you." Sophia frowned. She was not used to her mother talking like this about many things. Her mother was the kind of woman that was going to live forever and ever, and Sophia had believed every word of it. Yes, her mother did do handstands on the patio railings every day, but she managed that very effectively, with no risk of falling whatsoever. Now she was talking about her demise, almost as if it was written in the stars for her. This was an unpleasant, unnaturally awful conversation to be having with her mother, that did not resonate very well with a 16-year-old teenager like herself, Death was a taboo subject that she had given no attention to. Granted, the slideshow at school about malignant melanoma and its intrinsic dangers had of course scared her half to death, giving her food for thought, but after that she hadn't considered the matter very much. Naturally, it had made Sophia worry to a degree that her mother's incessant sunbathing rituals might one day catch up with her, potentially turning her into a ticking time bomb. That one morning she might wake up to discover her mother had a nasty mole on her face, accompanied by a deadly diagnosis. The truth was that her mother was easygoing, fun-loving, relaxed and carefree. She was as untethered as a wild horse, and did what the hell she liked with her life, and she'd be damned what anybody else thought of her. She never took things too seriously. But the sober guarded tone of her voice on this occasion had made Sophia's blood run cold. Her throat became dry and parched, rather like a riverbed. She even noticed that her heart began to thunder in her chest, like it did when she was running to the school bus, to avoid missing it. Why would her mother be talking about death like this? That was a dirty word that she'd rather never discuss if given the chance. But here her mother was talking about the subject as nonchalantly as if discussing the cereal they were eating for breakfast that morning. And this behaviour was so unlike her mother. Was there something going on with her mother that she did not know about? Had her mother's tanning sessions finally revealed, after all this time, some life-threatening prognosis? At her last visit to the dermatologist's office, perhaps? Or worse still, had her mother had some kind of premonition to be talking about this? You heard of these kind of things. Was her mother predicting her own early demise? Oh, please God, no. If not, why on earth were they engaging in this disquieting conversation together? It made no sense to her at all. She'd rather dig a big hole for herself in the ground and bury herself beneath it than hear her mother talking like this. She thought of what it would be like to be alone in the world, without her mother. It scared her half to death. She didn't want to envisage such discombobulating scenarios. She had lived with her mother all her life. Yes, her mother did have some quirky idiosyncrasies, but that was all part of her mother's charm. It was true. Her mother had become more like a friend to her than a mother, but she saw that as a distinct advantage. Granted, her mother had been through more men than some girls have had hot dinners. She was as vain, self-centered, and egotistical as you could get. But despite everything, and against all the odds, Sophia had thoroughly enjoyed a very good childhood. She had never wanted for anything. She had always known that Alexa loved her in her own funny, rather quirky way, even though she'd never been very good at showing it or expressing her feelings. She and her mother had shared some very good times together. Sophia adored her mother with all her heart, although these days, with her capriciously belligerent teenage outbursts, the love she directed towards her mother was in short supply. But was that any surprise? Every teenager's story is much the same. It really annoyed her that her mother had such an aversion to her boyfriend Carpenter. Her mother had made no secret about this fact, that this young man made her skin crawl. Of course she would say that, Sophia thought to herself. Alexa hated tattoos and piercings with a passion, and the punk rock way in which Carpenter dressed rarely irked her mother. Her mother found him unsavoury, but then she didn't know him, did she? Her mother was so very quick to judge a book by its cover. If her mother suddenly died, Sophia surmised she'd probably be forced to move in with Carpenter and his mother. But the thought of losing her mother didn't bear thinking about. She was surprised to discover that tears were developing in her eyes. "Why are you talking like this, Mum? Are you insane? You're not going to die. You're upsetting me." "Sweetheart, I have no intention of upsetting you, and for that I'm sorry," said Alexa, cradling her daughter lovingly in her arms and giving her a huge hug. She hadn't hugged Sophia in a long time, and was genuinely rather surprised that her teenager almost welcomed the embrace. She could be so prickly at times. Alexa looked lovingly into her daughter's eyes, wiping away her tears with a tissue. Why on earth are you crying, love? It's unlike you to cry. Because, blubbered Alexa, I don't want you to die. Why are you talking like this? It's horrible, Mum. It's horrible. You're scaring me.
Alexa cradled her daughter's face in her hands, lifting it up to her eyes. Their eyes met.
Listen to me, love. I am not going anywhere. Well, I have no intention of doing so. Nor do I have any intention of dying any time soon. So get that warped idea out of your head, will you?
Sophia nodded.
But if you're not going to die, why are we discussing this? Because it needs to be discussed, love. No one likes to talk about their death, especially their own, and I'm no exception to that rule. Look, this is a conversation I don't enjoy, and I've been putting off, but it needs to be discussed. If the worst ever came to the worst, you need to know what to do. Everyone who has children writes a will, don't they? It's a precautionary measure for them. I haven't got much to leave you, love, but I did take out a funeral policy to pay for those expenses, should the worst come to the worst, as that sort of thing can be very expensive. But I want you to do that very simply. I don't want any fuss should I die. There's a letter in the safe that I wrote to your father. I need you to give it to him in the advent of my death. In the letter I affirm that he is indeed your father, and that he has a biological obligation to take care of you, if I am no longer around. It was a letter I didn't want to write at all. It's in the safe. I've also got his address and phone number on a piece of paper there, so you can easily contact him, when the time is right, in such an eventuality, should that ever arise. But I know he will help you. He's a very good man. I know that much very well.
My father? Asked Sophia, looking aghast. So you do know who he is? I thought you said you didn't know who my father was.
I was being a bit economical with the truth, love. No harm in that. Of course I know who your father is. His name is Callum Barclay. He was the only man I was seeing at the time when I fell pregnant with you. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind he is your biological father. Your father was a good man. I could easily have married him in a heartbeat if he had been unattached. I've done my research on him since. He lives in a beautiful house in the Georgian countryside, surrounded by woods, streams, and that kind of thing. Very lovely place to live, I hasten to say. Your father is reasonably well off. He's married to a woman called Margaret, who I gather everybody calls Maggie. And he has 2 children, a boy and girl, I believe. The girl's name is Julia. The boy's name is Spencer. Julia is the older of the 2.
So I've got 2 siblings? Asked Sophia, looking dumbfounded. I can't believe it. I've got a sister and a brother.
Yes, you have, love, half-siblings. Your father and his family know nothing about your existence currently, and I would very much like to keep it that way for the sake of his family. I had an affair with your father when he was going through a rather tumultuous time in his marriage. He was having a break from his wife that they both agreed to. He was considering a divorce, but then he realized how much he missed his wife, how much he loved her, so they got back together again. I was genuinely very thrilled for him. I might be many things, love, but I do not like to break up a good family. I knew it would be best not to tell you in the circumstances about your father. But if I die, it's a completely different matter altogether, is it not? Your biological father has a duty of responsibility to care for you, should I die. I would want him to take responsibility for you. He's a very good man of character. He won't dismiss his parental obligations.
Sophia nodded. What could she say? She wanted this conversation over and done with. She didn't want to talk of her mother's death. It made the possibility of her mother dying all the more real. She was heartily relieved when her mother changed the subject and said, I tell you what, let's watch a movie together and order pizza, shall we? Yes, please, Mum. I'll have a margarita, she said enthusiastically. And after this conversation, Mum, it better be a comedy.
A comedy it is, then. Later on in the evening, her mother had had a long, earnest chat with Sophia about her dreadful boyfriend, Carpenter, and Sophia began to feel things felt normal again in her household. Of course her mother was not going to die, although she wished to God her mother wouldn't do those handstands on the balcony railings or bathe in the sun so recklessly for hours on end. Those kind of behaviours definitely put her life at risk, but she thought better than to harp on about the subject. They'd said too much tonight already. It must have been about 3 weeks after Alexa's rather unfortunate conversation with Jane Goodlington about how she was putting her safety at risk with the handstand she was doing on the balcony railings, that Alexa found herself yet again on the patio. She was wearing her yoga leggings and crop top. She began to do her stretching on her yoga mat that she did every day as a matter of routine. She went through all the sequence poses, from the downward dog to the warrior. Once again she had the ominous feeling that she was being watched. She was sure Jane Goodlington's brother, whom she'd never physically seen, was probably ogling her again. But being an exhibitionist of note, she thoroughly enjoyed being fully appreciated by a man. It meant that even though she was now in her 40s, she was still successfully turning heads. But was that any surprise, really? Alexa knew she was in excellent shape. Everyone was telling her as much. People told her she had the body of a teenager, long and lean. Alexa decided she would do a few handstands on the balcony railing again. It gave her a thrill to do these exercises. It made her feel as free as a bird. But she knew she was perfectly safe doing these. Most people saw this as a daredevil stunt. But Alexa didn't consider herself brave. She did these manoeuvres because she knew they imposed no risk to her safety at all. But the moves always exhilarated her, as if for a brief moment she had experienced zero gravity. As she was pressing her arms up on the railing and lifting her legs above her head, she heard a thump, as if someone had landed on her patio with a thud. She saw the distinctive shape of a man. Before she could do anything, she felt a forceful push. She began to scream as she fell away from the balcony railings and went tumbling over past 9 stories to the courtyard below with a mighty thunderous crash. She did not hear a man's voice on her patio say, "Good riddance, you bitch. Now I've got my back on you." Sid the janitor was busy cleaning up some McDonald packagings that he found yet again lying across the courtyard. It was an unsightly problem that was getting way out of hand. It certainly wasn't his job to go picking up after other people like this. He felt grievously annoyed that this litter problem was getting out of control. He knew who was responsible. It was that seedy-looking teenager that had been hanging around rather unscrupulously with his goth-looking girlfriend. He knew the girl's name was Sophia. She lived in apartment 92 with her mother. Sid had spoken to the girl's mother, a woman called Alexa, about the problem, suggesting that Sophia's boyfriend was behind the thefts in his office of all the parcels that seemed to have gone missing, and was throwing out all his rubbish, so that Sid was forced to pick up after him. When he had mentioned all this to Alexa, the girl's mother, she had become quite defensive about the matter, refusing point-blank to admit that her daughter's boyfriend was the cause of so much discord. But Sid had detected a look in her eye that affirmed to him that she did believe her daughter's boyfriend was certainly not good news. Sid sighed as he picked up some of the litter to put into the dark bin liner, and that was when he saw the body hurtling towards him, crashing to the ground with a loud thud, missing him by mere inches. For a moment he couldn't see a thing, as he was blinded by the blood that sprayed into his eyes. And when he wiped away the droplets of blood from his eyes, he recognized the mangled deceased body lying spread out before him as belonging to Alexa Muldooney. Some of the residents complained that Alexa did handstands on her balcony railings. "Silly woman," he thought. "She must have lost her balance. But honestly, if you're going to perform acrobatics on your patio like a circus clown, you're asking for trouble, are you not? This was an accident waiting to happen. But if it was a murder, I would put money on it being the daughter's insidious-looking boyfriend. If he's involved in this in any way, He'd be responsible. Everyone naturally assumed Alexa's tragic death was all an accident, but Jane Goodlington's brother knew differently, of course. He rubbed his hands with glee, glancing down at the deceased body lying across the courtyard. "Not so pretty now, are you, Alexa?" he smirked, as he observed the whole scene before him, while the EMTs rushed around the place like a hive of busy carpenter ants. "This time Humpty Dumpty cannot be put together again," he said.
Maggie Barclay. Maggie was trying to find some shelter at the bus stop. She knew her husband Callum would prefer her to use an Uber taxi to get home, but that was so much more expensive. Although Maggie could easily afford the expense, money was not the problem these days, given her husband Callum was doing reasonably well on the financial front. But that was not the point. Maggie, who had come from a less than affluent background, believed in spending money very wisely and being scrupulous at all times. Despite being married for over 20 years, she had never got out of the habit of counting the pennies and being very savvy with the family's money. She had decided that taking a bus from town seemed like a sensible idea, although now she was rather reconsidering this, as the rain belted down indiscriminately. It was such a dreadful pity that her car was still in residence at the car dealership. She was told that it would not be available for collection, as it was a Japanese model, requiring specialized parts that they didn't have in stock at the moment. She knew that any trips to town would mean taking the bus. She'd met up this morning with a very good friend of hers called Meredith for coffee, but she hadn't anticipated the weather taking a nasty turn for the worse like this. That was when she noticed the same young teenager, who was probably about 18 years old, although she couldn't be sure. He'd been hanging around the coffee shop when she'd been having coffee with Meredith. Now the seedy-looking youth was hanging around the bus shelter like a bad smell. He was scruffy and unkempt. He looked like he'd slept in the same clothes for weeks on end, and was a board-certified jerk as far as she was concerned. This was almost certainly affirmed for her, when out of his ugly, seemingly trendy camouflage jacket, he pulled out a packet of Marlboro cigarettes, removing one from the packaging, which he lit up with a cheap lighter. He then began to unabashedly smoke in people's faces, blowing out pillows of fumes as if they were kids' air bubbles. People were huddled together rather tightly under the canopy of the bus shelter, as it continued to pour with rain. The young man didn't seem to care a jot that he was rudely filling people's lungs up with the noxious smoke. An elderly woman began to cough and splutter as she held on to her shopping tote bag, loaded with all kinds of shopping she had just purchased. The poor woman waved a withered, rather veiny hand in front of her face. She looked less than amused by the teenager's rudeness. Who could blame her for that? The teenager was tall and lanky, wearing tight-fitting black denim jeans, with deliberately designer-engineered rips or tears, if you like, around the knee area, so it looked as if he had a sequence of ladders in his pants. There were piercings in his ears and his nose, as well as his upper lips. His skin was as white and pale as a piece of paper, and he had abrupt outbreaks of spots around his chin area, which suggested he had a poor diet. He seemed totally oblivious to the offence he'd caused with his antisocial, inappropriate behaviour. He was wearing a small backpack on his back that he carried rather casually on his shoulders. It was swinging around inappropriately, slamming into people's backs. Maggie glared at him, but he failed to notice her disapproving looks. The bus pulled up to the curb and made a hissing sound as it finally drew to a stop. The ramp was making a beeping sound, beep, 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 as it was lowered for the old woman, so that she could easily get on to the bus with her shopping tote. Maggie helped the grateful woman with her heavy tote, boarding after her. She took a vacant window seat near the front end of the bus and set her purse on her lap, while she waited rather patiently for the other people to board after her. She observed the rain was still coming down in cats and dogs, and was heartily relieved to be in the dry on the bus, not stuck in the cold rain. She could only hope and pray that when she got off the bus at her stop, that the rain would have abated by then, because it was quite a walk from her stop through the woods to her house,
and she didn't like the idea of getting wet, as she foolishly had not brought an umbrella along with her. The blonde teenager, with his long, straggly, rather unkempt hair, that was so incredibly greasy, you could probably have fried your chips in the fat it created. He threw his cigarette onto the wet concrete of the bus shelter, stamping it out rather viciously with one of his heavy boots. He then scrambled awkwardly onto the bus and began to grovel with the driver. Why was Maggie not remotely surprised by this? She wondered how very often the poor bus driver had to put up with all these ridiculous sob stories from people wanting a free ride. "Hey, man, will you cut me a break? I really need to get this bus. It's coming down in sheets out there. I'm completely skint, got no money to pay for the fare." The bus driver grumbled. "Right, just this once. But don't you make a habit of it, young man, because everyone on this bus has to pay their fare, and I can't be seen to be giving some people special favours, if you get my drift." The young man nodded and walked onto the bus, failing to even thank the driver for his kindness. He shook off the rain from his camouflage jacket like a wet dog, getting water all over the bus. The smell of his cigarette smoke wafted around the bus, as the young man smelt like a portable cigarette tray. He trudged over to a seat reserved for the elderly and disabled, removing his backpack and placing it on the seat next to him, so that he now occupied 2 seats. The teenager pulled out a familiar brown bag from his backpack. It was marked McDonald's. He removed what appeared to be a cheeseburger bun from inside the packaging. He began to hungrily devour the burger, eating it with his mouth wide open, so that Maggie could see him churning his food. He messily spilled crumbs everywhere, all over the seat and all over the bus floor. He then began to eat a small bag of McDonald's fried chips, which he stuffed into his mouth in stacked handfuls. The bus now began to smell of cheeseburger, which made Maggie want to gag. There was a sign in the bus clearly stipulating for no eating and drinking was allowed on the bus, but rules were clearly meant to be broken by this layabout teenager, who gave them scant regard. If he was a dog, he'd have probably thought nothing of lifting his leg on one of the seats. The old lady seated on the seat opposite the young man gave him a dirty look, and the teenager just smirked at her with a gleeful look on his face, almost as if he knew very well his seat was reserved for the elderly, and knowing he was occupying a seat that he shouldn't be in seemed to give him a certain amount of satisfaction, as if he rather got off on the idea of being rebellious by nature and ruffling everybody's feathers very successfully, which he clearly had done. The teenager rolled up his burger patty paper and the brown paper bag it had come in, along with the cardboard that had contained the hot chips. He tossed them all onto the floor of the bus in a crumpled heap. The old lady rolled her eyes in disgusted revulsion, her pale blue eyes buried beneath folds of crinkled flesh. She met Maggie's gaze. The 2 women locked gazes together, as if they were privately conjoined in their disgust over this teenager. The old lady was not remotely impressed, but she seemed to know better than to say anything, although her lips did quiver rather awkwardly, as if she was tempted to reprimand the teenager. If anything, this teenager had absorbed Maggie's undivided attention. She watched him wrestling around rather awkwardly with his backpack, as if he was stumbling around in the darkness looking for something that he couldn't find. Eventually he hit pay dirt, pulling out an iPad, and then replacing it inside the bag. He then pulled out a smartphone and began to tap away at it with his filthy fingers. Maggie stared at him in abject shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The young teenager was clearly not as skint as he had claimed to be, even though he could easily pass for being homeless, judging by the scruffy way he presented himself to the world. Did the teenager have no shame at all? He could clearly afford to buy a pack of cigarettes at $9 a pack, a burger from McDonald's, iPads and smartphones. You would think he could easily afford to pay the $2.50 bus ticket. It was clear he was an opportunist who took great delight in exploiting people's kindness. Maggie did not know whether to be amused, entertained, or very disgusted by this young teenager's audacity, so she found herself scowling at the young teenager rather indignantly. The young teenager clearly sensed Maggie's intrusive, rather disgruntled look that she directed at him. He returned her objectionable gaze with a frosty glare that drilled right through her, so that immediately in embarrassment she looked away and pretended to be examining the beaded raindrops on the glass pane of the bus. She did not like this big creep one little bit. He was objectionable, to say the very least, an unsavoury character, the kind of thug that if you encountered down a dark alleyway would make you call 911 even before he attacked you, because you would be absolutely certain he would. Indeed, as Maggie thought about it, she could easily visualize the young teenager pickpocketing people's bags and breaking into cars. She could see him joyriding down roads, burglarizing people's homes while they were out. She could not help but cautiously wonder whether the iPad and the smartphone she had observed in his possession were ill-gotten gains. She was almost certain they were. She wondered privately what other treasures lay stashed away in that backpack of his. A plethora of people's cell phones, she suspected. She'd have liked to have given the young teenager the benefit of the doubt, in the way the bus driver obviously had. But everything about him, most especially his stinky attitude, was very unbecoming. She could hear him now grumbling away on the phone. She tried to eavesdrop as to what he was saying. "Sophia! Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Sophia? Yes, I'm on the bus. I'm hot on the trail, just so you know. Keep you posted," he said, closing his phone and giving Maggie a formidable glare. Once again she quickly looked away. I don't like him, Maggie thought. What kind of a parent raises a child like this? He is so awful. She found herself grasping her purse very much more tightly on her lap, as if she was half afraid he'd hold up the bus all of a sudden and snatch everybody's valuables from them before making his grand escape, like the robbers on the great train robbery. Maggie glanced around the bus rather nervously, sensing the young teenager's gaze was still locked on her. But she pretended not to know this, that he was looking straight at her. She once again glanced out of the rain-beaded window and began to inwardly pray that the rain would stop its deluge. The bus finally did stop at various destinations, until it was only Maggie left on the bus, along with this young teenager. Naturally, his presence made her feel all the more uneasy, but there was no way he could be getting off at the location she was getting off at. She lived in an area that was pretty sequestered, and she'd never seen this teenager before, so he clearly didn't live in her part of the world, or she'd almost certainly have known about it. Maggie was heartily relieved to see the rain had finally abated. She pressed the bell for the next stop, looking around rather awkwardly to see that the young teenager appeared to be fixated on his smartphone. That was a relief. He didn't appear to even notice her. The bus hissed as it came to a grinding halt, and Maggie hurriedly clambered off, heartily relieved to see the young, irritating teenager had not got off at her stop. Thank God, she thought. She told herself she was being ridiculous. He was probably harmless anyway, but she hadn't liked him at all. She grimaced as she walked down the earthen road, where pools of water covered the pathway like tiny ponds. She observed a couple of frogs were darting around happily. Maggie was absolutely exhausted by the time she reached the turning in the end of the road. That gave her a convenient shortcut through the woods. She was certain she'd heard the bus hissing and stopping once again, but gave the matter no more attention, until she noticed coming down the road towards where she'd got off from the bus was the young teenager. Oh my God! He was clearly looking for her. His head was turning around, backwards and forwards. He ran towards the bus drop-off point and began looking up and down the road, his eyes then fixated on the woods. Maggie remembered how the young teenager had spotted her in the coffee shop earlier on in the morning. Then he'd taken the same bus as her, and now she was absolutely certain he was actually following her. Did he want revenge because she had glared at him on the bus? Surely not. He wasn't that small-minded. Maggie made sure she could not be seen, while she clandestinely took cover behind a tree at the edge of the woods. The young teenager was clearly looking for her. She was in no doubt about that now. He certainly didn't seem amused to have lost her. Maggie's heart began to pound violently in her chest. She felt conspicuously vulnerable, very alone. There wasn't a solitary soul in sight to help her, should she need that help. The young man looked towards the woods. He examined the muddy ground before him. Maggie suspected she must have left a trail of footprints behind, as the teenager began to follow the trail into the woods, looking decidedly pleased with himself, rather like a skilled tracker that had found an unlikely trail he'd been looking for. My God, there was no doubt he was definitely stalking her. Why, oh why, had Maggie not listened to her husband, and listened to his reasoned advice in taking an Uber taxi instead of the bus? Why was she always trying to save money, when there was no need of that? Then none of this would have happened to her. Maggie's heart began performing a series of acrobatic leapfrogs in her chest. Her pulse began to race as she stepped up her speed and ran ahead into the woods. Thank God she was wearing sensible shoes. She knew the young teenager, with his long, nimble legs, would likely catch up with her pretty soon. If need be, she could take cover and hide here in the woods. He'd never know that she knew he was stalking her. So she did have a slim advantage on him, having spotted him through the trees. She inwardly wailed as she prayed for the safe sanctuary of her home. It felt like she had to run through a labyrinth of trees until she finally reached her homestead. Focus, she told herself. You can do this, Maggie. You can do this. Even though she had her cell phone at her disposal, she did not want to call anyone at this moment. It was far too risky. She might be overheard by the young man, and even texting someone might take minutes of her time that she could ill afford to lose. She needed to get away fast. She had haunting images of the young blonde man pouncing on her, slashing her throat with a sharp knife, all because she had glared at him on the bus. Maybe he had some kind of psychiatric disorder, was slightly unhinged. She wouldn't be remotely surprised if that was the case. He certainly fitted the profile of somebody like that. Maybe he had escaped from a mental asylum and was now living rough on the streets. Supposing he'd failed to take his medication that helped him to stay in his right frame of mind. She did recall watching a documentary once about a young man who went on a random killing spree simply because he was not in his right mind. "Why did you do it?" he was asked by the interviewer. "I forgot to take my medications," he had said, "and when I don't take them, I am consumed with a desire to kill anything that touches my path." The memory of the documentary resounded in Maggie's ears like a clanging bell. There was something not right about this young man, she knew it. She had seen his outlandish behaviour on the bus, and knew instinctively he could not be trusted by any manner of means. He was a nasty character. She suddenly heard leaves crunching, twigs breaking, and she knew without a shadow of a doubt that the young man was quickly gaining ground on her. That was when she had the idea to climb one of the trees that was covered in curtains of shrubbery. If she hid clandestinely among the high branches, hopefully the young man would never find her. Maggie would not describe herself as nimble, far from it in fact. But when you're desperately afraid for your life, your adrenaline throbs through your bloodstream like a freight train on full throttle, and when it does this so seamlessly, it's amazing what incredible feats you can accomplish, which in a normal state of mind would seem close to impossible and well beyond reach. How she did it, Maggie did not remember. Her memory at this point in time went blank, like a piece of paper, devoid of any writing on it. In a hasty, determined scramble, she managed to climb up the tree, where she hid among the branches, remaining quiet as she possibly could. She observed the young teenager walking past her down the earthen trail, kicking his boots on the ground, so that leaves and debris flew ahead of him. She caught a quick glimpse of his camouflage jacket and black ripped jeans. He was failing to look up in the trees above his head, probably thinking that someone like Maggie would never hide there, because she probably couldn't reach the branches in the first place. Normally he'd have been right about that. When he coughed, she nearly jumped out of her skin. She held her breath tightly, terrified he'd hear her raspy breathing, which appeared very loud in her own ears. So much so that she was absolutely certain that the entire forest had heard her. She was lucky, as the woodgrove was quite overgrown, with shrubbery growing indiscriminately between the trees, and it was rather dense, rather like hair growing unappropriately out of someone's ears. She was flooded with huge relief as the teenager walked past her. She clung tightly to the branches, high up in the tree, absolutely terrified that the young man would finally see her. It had not even crossed her mind that he could be completely harmless, for she was filled with a dreadful terror. Maggie was still far too anxious to come down the branches of the tree, even though she probably couldn't have done so, even if she'd wanted to. It was late afternoon, drifting into early evening, and gradually becoming dark. She had no concept of the time, or how long she'd remained up in the tree for, but her fear had tethered her to the branches, as if she had been stuck to them by superglue. It was only when the teenager walked back the way he'd come that Maggie decided to climb down the tree. But while it had been so easy for her to get up it, because she couldn't even remember how she'd done it, it was almost impossible to go down the same way she'd come. She'd never been remotely athletic at the very best of times, and now she began to panic. She decided she should phone her husband, wrestled around in her purse for her cell phone, but her fingers were like butter, and the cell phone unfortunately slipped out of her fingers, landing somewhere in the undergrowth. She doubted that even when she reached the ground, whether she would recover her cell phone. It could be buried anywhere beneath the leaves and shrubbery, and would be close to impossible to find. It was when Maggie heard a man whistle that she was flooded with immense relief. Furthermore, she knew who was whistling. It was the rancher who lived next door to them, a man called Timmy Tomahawk, and that man never stopped whistling. You could always hear him coming from a mile away, before you even saw the man. The woodgrove was the in-between space that bordered her neighbour's property from their own. Timmy Tomahawk often took his big black dog Jumbo for a walk in the woods in the late afternoon and early evening. He had told her all about it, and she'd almost forgotten about that. This was a stroke of very good fortune. Maggie was certain the kind gentleman would help her down from the tree, but she needed to get his attention first. The kind rancher may wonder what she was doing there, perched up high on the tree branches in the first place. Would he think she was completely balmy, especially if she told him that a young teenage lout had stalked her from the bus drop-off point, following her into the woods, so she'd hidden from him? Would he even believe her unlikely story? But Maggie felt too exhausted to actually care about that. Her family would be awfully worried about her by now, if she failed to return home. She needed some help getting down this tree. She was absolutely terrified she'd fall and break an ankle. Maggie began to cry out for Timmy's help. "Timmy! Timmy, is that you? Timmy, is that you? I'm stuck up on a tree. It's Maggie Barclay. Timmy!" She sighed with relief when she heard feet running towards her. Timmy had always struck her as a rather lean, nimble man, who was rather light on his feet. But he ran through the woodgrove towards her, with what seemed like a thunderous footfall, and she didn't hear any dog barking, which was rather unusual. The ground seemed to vibrate under his weight. Maybe he was heavier than she remembered him to be. Maggie felt relieved to know he was on his way to her. He'd easily get her down this tree, with a little help on his part. Maggie saw the figure approach her. At first she did wonder why on such a warm day that Timmy Tomahawk appeared to be wearing a woolly onesie. He looked much bigger than she remembered him to be. But as she looked down at the figure, looking up at her, high in the branches, she realized to her horror she was staring at a female Bigfoot. Maggie was so dumbfounded, so disquieted by this enigmatic, paradoxical, and absurd encounter, that in her abject shock she almost fell straight out of the tree. She began to wonder if she was so overtired, so exhausted, so fatigued that she was now seeing things that weren't actually there. But that was wishful thinking on her part, and she knew it. The Bigfoot was definitely real. Maggie felt anxiety seize through her bone, marrow, and sinew like a supercharged adrenal rush. But her fear response made her freeze up like a solid block of ice. She found herself clinging tightly to the branches, rather helplessly, as the Bigfoot's dark, treacle-coloured eyes surveyed her, taking her all in, with a curious intrigue and a somewhat amused look. The creature clearly had a sense of humour. And maybe it was rather funny seeing Maggie stuck up in a tree like this. The Bigfoot probably was wondering how on earth she'd got there in the first place. Maggie had no way of knowing how to react to this Bigfoot, who was clearly female, based on her small breasts that were almost completely shrouded by long curtains of dark hair. She was powerfully built, stocky, robust, and burly. Maggie felt incredibly intimidated by her sheer imposing size. How big was this thing, she wondered? And was she going to harm her? What shall I do to get away from her, Maggie thought. But as she asked herself these questions, she was surprised when the Bigfoot spoke to her in a language she could not understand. It astonished her that the Bigfoot actually spoke to her in an intelligible language. And Maggie knew with a profound intelligence like this, the Bigfoot was both discerning and clever. What happened next completely amazed and mesmerized Maggie, as the words the Bigfoot spoke to her were automatically translated in her mind in some kind of miraculous telepathic exchange. Kilati, sogolasina, fa ki sakwasha, ha kilasina, hobani kilasun. You have nothing to fear. I'm here to help you. Do you want to come down from that tree or not? Or do you want to stay there all evening? I heard you calling out for help. I came to your rescue. Shall I leave you be? Or would you like me to help you get down from the tree? I can see you're struggling to make your way down. I could always walk away if you'd prefer. But I'm a guardian of the forest, and I like to help anybody that's in trouble. No, please don't leave me, said Maggie, suddenly realizing that life had come back to her frozen body, as if the ice within her had all but melted away. This intimidating Bigfoot wanted to help her, and Maggie absolutely believed her. The energy she exuded was benevolent and kind. The Bigfoot was so incredibly tall, about 9 foot or so, but she had persuaded Maggie to loosen her grip from the branches and free fall, so that she would catch Maggie. Maggie was not comfortable about this maneuver, but she had a sense that the Bigfoot would not let her down. She was so powerfully built and seemed to be very aware of what she was doing. Maggie needed to trust her, and that is what she would do. Maggie closed her eyes tightly, loosening her grip from the upper branches of the tree. She finally let go and began to free fall. And before she could worry about taking a nasty tumble, the Bigfoot's powerful arms caught her very easily. The Bigfoot gently placed her on the ground, as if she was a tiny, fragile porcelain doll. It felt a little like she was being handled incredibly gently by King Kong himself. Thank you so much, said Maggie, gathering the purse that she'd thrown to the ground. The Bigfoot appeared to be bending over some dense shrubbery and fumbling around for something, and then the Bigfoot pulled out her cell phone, handing it to Maggie. Maggie took it from her, astounded. How did you know it was there? She asked the Bigfoot. Kilati, posasha, the blue light, she said. I could see the blue light. It was clear to Maggie that the Bigfoot could see frequencies that were invisible to a human's naked eye. Maggie's body felt so stiff as she began to walk through the trees, with a female Bigfoot by her side, who seemed to insist on chaperoning her back to safety, as if the Bigfoot had taken it upon herself to be fully responsible for Maggie's charge. Maggie was touched to the quick by the gentleness of the creature. Even though the Bigfoot never mentioned that she'd seen Maggie before, Maggie got the sense that the Bigfoot knew exactly who she was, and had probably been observing her for many years, in a cloak-and-dagger way behind the trees. In a strange way, this knowledge was comforting to Maggie, for she realized that this female Bigfoot was definitely a guardian of the forest as she described herself to be, watching her with a very protective matriarch-like energy. Maggie recalled how on previous shortcuts she had taken through the woods she always had a sense of knowing that something was watching her. She had never felt threatened by this in any way, but had always felt something was there. When she had expressed these feelings to her husband, he had all but laughed at her and said, "Of course something is there, love. The wood grove is full of invisible eyes. Birds, chipmunks, squirrels, field mice, rabbits. I could go on, but I won't. So if you feel you're being watched, you probably are. I wouldn't be at all surprised by that."
What Callum had failed to realise, that this unsettling feeling of being watched all the time that Maggie acquired when taking shortcuts through the woodgrove was not that of a field mouse or a rabbit that was observing her, but something infinitely bigger in size. She had certainly sensed a large, formidable presence in her midst. She had decided better than discussing these feelings with her husband, for fear that he might discourage her from walking in the woods. Maggie had shaken those bizarre feelings off as just the musings of an overactive imagination on her part. Now she considered that all this time maybe the female Bigfoot had been watching over her, and she was certain that this was the case. With the Bigfoot now at her side, the thought of the young teenager that had followed her from the drop-off point at the bus stop made her almost feel rather foolish. Maybe he had not meant to harm her after all. But Maggie was absolutely certain that the seedy-looking character had indeed been following her. But why, she couldn't imagine. When Maggie reached the edge of the woodgrove, she observed the reassuring, comforting silhouette of her beloved farmhouse. Most of the lights were on inside. It was shrouded by a curtain of darkness that had cloaked the sky. But thankfully the round circle of a light gossamer moon cast her shadows of light all over the landscape, so at least Maggie could see where she was going. Even the crickets and frogs had come out to sing their evening, very tuneful chorus. She felt her heart leaping with happiness to be home again. She was glad that this less than pleasant day was now finally behind her, where half of it had been spent, unfortunately parked up a tree. She thanked the Bigfoot and bounded towards her house, glancing ever so briefly over her shoulders to see that the Bigfoot was still watching her, waiting for her to get indoors. When Maggie finally opened the front door, she decided to keep the events of the day a secret. For a start, she knew her husband Callum would not be remotely impressed if he knew she'd been followed by an unsavoury teenager from the bus stop. She could imagine his reaction. He would likely lecture her about her penny-pinching ways. "You see, this wouldn't have happened if you'd taken an Uber like a normal person. What were you thinking, Maggie? I'm sorry, love, but you brought this on yourself." She didn't need a lecture from her husband. If she told him about the Bigfoot rescuing her from the tree, he'd probably laugh out loud and ask her if she really had coffee with Meredith in the afternoon at the cafe. Or was the concoction adulterated with magic mushrooms, perhaps? Maggie decided, "No, I'm not going to tell anybody what happened to me today. But one thing is for certain. I hope to God I don't see that dreadful teenager again." Her hopes in that regard would be very short-lived. Sophia Maldini's account. But are you absolutely sure it was her? 100%, I mean. You believe this is my real father's wife, Maggie Barclay? Is that what you're saying, Carpenter? Yes, that's what I'm saying. I told you I've seen her before. Remember when I did a surveillance on her farmhouse last week? I was actually rather surprised to see she was enjoying a cup of coffee in the local town with a girlfriend of hers. I recognized her at once. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought I might be able to initiate a conversation with her, so I could tell her all about you. So I followed her. "Initiate a conversation with her?" laughed Sophia. "I'll believe that when I see it. I don't think you know how to talk to anyone, Carpenter. And I don't say that to be unkind, but it's true." "Well, you're probably right about that, because I didn't speak to her. Not really. Scowled at her, maybe, but that's about it." "You scowled at her? Well, that sounds like a promising start." "She was actually very annoying looking down on me, she was." "Well, maybe for good reason. Did you do something to offend her, Carpenter? I bet you did. I know what you're like. You haven't got the greatest of manners. Please don't tell me you were eating on the bus, because when you eat you can see everything that's going on in your mouth." "Well, maybe that's true, but she didn't need to cast such a judgmental gaze all over me, as if I was a lower form of pond life. She's definitely very snooty, and got a high opinion of herself." "Well, what exactly happened?"
Well, I discreetly followed her to the bus, didn't I? I got on the bus. It was pouring with rain. I had no money on my person, but thankfully the bus driver gave me a free ride. Maggie Barclay got off on a lonely, sequestered country road, perforated by large pools of muddy water everywhere, surrounded by thick groves of trees. I persuaded the driver to stop for me after he'd dropped Maggie off a little further up the road. For a while I thought I'd actually missed her, but thankfully I found a trail of her footprints in the mud that led directly to the woods. I suspect she was taking a shortcut through there, but I was unable to find her anywhere. She seemed to disappear into thin air. It was very baffling. I know that her farmhouse is through the woods. She must have got home before I even caught up with her. I suspect she's a very fast walker. But it was so muddy. I got mud over everything. I was hoping to catch up with her, to have some words with her. I wanted to tell her about you, who you are. On the bus I wanted to say something, but I completely lost my nerve. I mean, this is not an easy conversation to have, is it? And Maggie was giving me some really mean looks. She was probably pissed, 'cause, as you say, I was eating on the bus, which is against the rules. Sophia frowned. She rolled her eyes in the back of her head. Typical of you, to be eating in the bus. No wonder she was frowning at you. I don't blame her. What if she knew you were following her, Carpenter? Did you stop to think about that for a moment when you got off the bus? I hope she didn't see you. You might have scared her half to death. And how do you think she's actually going to take it if you tell her that I'm her husband's daughter? Personally, I'm glad you didn't manage to catch up with her. Imagine a perfect stranger running up to you and telling you that their husband had a child with another woman. She doesn't know anything about me. She'd probably think you'd run away from a psychiatric unit. I'm not sure we're approaching this matter right. We need to be more delicate about this. Maggie might be very hurt about all this, I hope you appreciate. Well, what exactly did you want me to do? Said Carpenter, sounding aggrieved. You told me to watch the comings and goings of the Barclay family for you, to see what they were like, before you finally got in touch with them. And I did that for you, did I not? Anyway, I don't believe for a second that Maggie Barclay likes me. I think supercilious, self-important, and patronizing are the words to describe her best. She's exactly like your mother was towards me, scowling at me on the bus, giving me dirty looks. So I scowled back at her. I knew when she looked at me so disapprovingly that I'd never get to talk to her. You're always putting your foot in it, aren't you, Carpenter? I still cannot believe you went to Jane Goodlington's apartment after Mum fell from the balcony railings to her death, and told that woman that I recognised her brother from a photograph my mother had of him, that he sent her while he was in jail. I can't get over your doing that. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Sometimes you're so impulsive, Carpenter. You act before you think, like when you jumped onto the bus to follow Maggie Barclay. I mean, who does that? What's wrong with what I did? I think it was clever thinking of my part. Everything I do is for you, Sophia. Surely you know that. You said yourself you did not believe your mother's tragic death was an accident. You think this ex-con, by the name of Hugh Paris, who was writing to your mother from jail, was furious that she rejected him after she professed her undying love to him. You believe he discreetly pushed your mother from the balcony railings when she was doing her handstands. Given his sister Jane's flat is right next to your mother's flat, you know how easy it would have been for him to slide across to your mother's balcony. The design makes it extremely accessible. It would have been nothing for him to push her from the balcony railings to her death. It was very good I talked to Jane Goodlington about the matter. She did confirm her brother is the ex-con who has the name Hugh Paris. That was the man your mother was communicating with while she was in prison. Jane Goodlington's surname is the same as her late husband's, because she didn't want to go back to being called Paris. She said she hated that name. She did admit to me that her brother Hugh had a massive ego and would not have taken remotely kindly to being ditched by your mother while he was in prison. She had no idea that your mother had been writing to him. That was a huge shock for her. She was quite disquieted, actually, when I told her this. I could see she was beginning to think her brother might have had something to do with your mother's fortuitous passing. At first she believed, much like the police, that it was all a tragic accident. But there was a look in her eyes, Sophia, that told me instinctively that she was having big doubts.
Yes, but why on earth did you tell her all this? Why did you tell her that I was suspicious of her brother? She's bound to tell you that we believe he's behind my mother's death. If that ex-con knows that I'm suspicious of him, he might try to take me out himself. Did you ever stop to think about that for a moment, Carpenter? These ex-cons don't think twice of killing people, you know, that get in their way. That man does not want to be going to prison again, and if he's accused of my mother's death, he'll be locked away for good, and the authorities will throw away the key. And he will want to make sure that that does not happen to him. You should have kept your mouth shut, Carpenter.
Of course he won't come after you. You're being absolutely paranoid over nothing. The man's not completely stupid. The police believe it's an accident. What was it the police officer said to you? Tell me, what were his exact words?
Well, he said if my mother was stupid enough to do handstands on the balcony railings, she was asking for an accident to happen, and he wasn't remotely surprised that she had fallen to her death. But he didn't know how agile my mother was.
There you go.
What's that supposed to mean, there you go, Carpenter? Let me tell you something for nothing. My mother's death was no accident. Hear that? No accident. She's been doing those handstands on balcony railings since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. If she flips over by accident, she holds herself onto the railings and pulls herself straight back up. It's no big deal to her. It's as natural as breathing. She would never do something that would impose a threat to her life. My mother wanted me to get in touch with my dad, to tell him that I'm his daughter. And instead of sneaking around, I think we should take the bull by the horns and pay the Barclays a visit, don't you? Are you going to come with me or not, Carpenter? I would really appreciate your support on this.
Of course I'm going to come with you. I'm your boyfriend, aren't I? We'll do this together as a team. But I dare say Maggie Barclay will not be pleased to have a repeat encounter with me, based on the way she was glaring at me on the bus.
Maggie Barclay's account. It was a Saturday morning. Both my children were spending the weekend away with friends, so it was me and my husband all to ourselves. It was good to have quality time to spend with Callum, without the kids being around. I knew I was going to make the most of this wonderful weekend, and I was looking extremely forward to it. My husband was going to take me out in the evening for a romantic meal somewhere. We were going to watch soppy movies together, go for long, relaxing walks in the countryside, and thoroughly enjoy every moment of being together, just the two of us. I climbed out of bed to smell the delicious aroma of bacon and eggs wafting around the house. The sizzling smell of bacon made my stomach begin to grumble with hunger. My husband was clearly making a romantic breakfast for the two of us, and I was touched by these lovely gestures from him. I couldn't remember the last time that Callum had actually made me breakfast, so I was really going to indulge myself this weekend, as my husband had promised to spoil me rotten. I hurriedly dressed into a pair of comfortable butterscotch-coloured chinos, which I quickly put on, and I paired with a white cotton blouse. I also slipped into a pair of comfortable sandals. I could tell that this was going to be a great weekend. That was until the ominous knock came at the front door. It may have been a Saturday morning, but we were not expecting any guests, and I frowned at the thought of an intrusion on the serenity of this peaceful morning. Who could possibly be calling on us at this time? "I'll go and get it," I called out to my husband, and when I casually meandered to the front door and opened it, who should be standing there but the seedy teenager from the bus stop that I had been convinced had been stalking me, and he was now standing next to a girl who looked like a goth, dressed in a black dress and combat boots. She was wearing black lipstick on her lips and had tattoos all over her arms and a piercing in her nose. "I know you,"
I said, pointing to the seedy teenager. "You were on the bus with me, weren't you? And then you followed me all the way into the woods as I was making my way home. What on earth do you want? Just so you know, my husband is here, so don't try any funny stuff on me." "Look here, I'm sorry I followed you, right? I didn't mean to scare you. If you must know, I was following you because I needed to have a chat with you." "You needed a chat?" I scoffed. "If you wanted to say something to me, you had plenty of opportunity on the bus, did you not? And I cannot think what you needed to talk to me about anyway. I doubt that we have anything in common." "Ma'am, you were scowling at me. You were unapproachable. You didn't exactly make it easy for me to talk to you. I kind of lost my nerve." "Well, can you blame me for not being very amenable towards you? You ate like an absolute pig on the bus, chewing with your mouth wide open so I could see everything that was going on. You spilt crumbs all over the place, on the floor, on the seat, everywhere. The place smelt of McDonald's cheeseburger. And there was a sign saying that you shouldn't eat or drink on the bus. You stunk the whole place out with your food. Furthermore, if that wasn't bad enough, I noticed you freeloaded a ride on the bus when it only cost $2.50. When stashed away very conveniently in your backpack, you had the latest smartphone and tablet. You buy cigarettes, yet you claim you can't afford to buy a bus ticket. I knew I'd heard everything. Then you occupy 2 seats reserved for the disabled and the elderly. Are you surprised I scowled at you?" The young girl standing next to the teenage boy began to speak. There was something about her that reminded me of my daughter Julia. It was in her features and her mannerisms. "I'm very sorry about Carpenter. He's got very bad manners. I agree with you there. I don't blame you for scowling at him. I'd have probably done the same in the circumstances. I apologize for the fact he scared you half to death, following you off the bus. He can be such an idiot at times," she said, rolling her eyes in exasperation, as if she was talking about a belligerent little boy that had misbehaved. "Look, I'm here to see your husband, Callum Barclay. I've got business to discuss with him. It's very important." I looked at the young lady warily. She couldn't have been more than 16 years old, although she was very well spoken. What could she possibly want with my husband? How did she even know his name? Before I could tell the teenagers to go away, my husband entered the hall and stopped dead in his tracks as he stared at the 2 teenagers, in an expression of complete bemusement. He waved his hand in the air very dismissively and said, "I'm sorry. We're not doing any more sponsorships. I've done enough for the year." The young teenager that bore an uncanny resemblance to my daughter Julia stepped forward, pushing past me in the entrance hall, in a way that I found rather unsettling and presumptuous. Who the hell did she think she was? "You're Callum Barclay, are you not?" My husband looked taken aback. "Yes, that's me. How do you know my name?" "My name is Sophia Muldooney. I'm your daughter." My husband chuckled. "Oh, really? I don't think so, young lady. Nice try, though, I'll give you that. I don't know what stunt you're pulling, but I'm certainly not your father. I think I would know about it if I was." The young girl fiddled around with an envelope and presented it to my husband. "My mother's name was Alexa Muldooney. She died a few weeks back. She asked me to give this to you. You had an affair with my mother. At the time she was not seeing anyone, so there is no question that I am your daughter as far as she was concerned. But feel free to have a DNA test. I'm open to that. I won't take offense to it. In fact, I would positively encourage it. You made my mother pregnant. She never told you about me. She knew you were happily married, had a family. But she did tell me, if something untoward were to happen to her, that I must get in touch with you at once. She believed I needed a parent to financially and emotionally support me, which is why I'm here today. I brought my boyfriend along with me. This is Carpenter. I'm currently staying at his mother's house." My husband's face paled. "Alexa Muldooney is dead?" he asked. He genuinely looked sad about this. "I'm very sorry for your loss, young lady. How did that happen?"
She fell off the balcony railings of her patio after doing handstands. The police believe it was an accident. I don't believe that for a second. I have my theories as to what happened to her. My mother never took unnecessary risks. She was a natural gymnast.
Yes, that's right. I do remember her doing handstands on her balcony railings, said my husband. I did warn her how dangerous that was. But she never batted an eyelash doing those sequences. She was very nimble, I'll give her that. What is going on here? I asked my husband. This girl can't possibly be your daughter. It's impossible. You haven't cheated on me, have you, Callum? I would know about it if you had. Do you know this girl's mother? You're talking about her as if you know her intimately. I don't understand any of this. Is there something you haven't told me, Callum? Is there something that I should know? Of course I haven't cheated on you, love. What do you take me for? Said my husband. But remember when we separated for about 6 weeks? When our marriage went through a rocky patch? About 17 years ago or so? It's a long time ago now. You've probably almost forgotten. What I never told you was that I had a brief fling with another woman. I'm not proud of myself, love. Her name was Alexis Muldooney. I met her in a bar one night, and one thing led to another. What? You never told me any of this. This is all news to me. I was lonely, love. I was on my own. We saw each other for a few weeks, that's all. But it meant absolutely nothing. I can assure you of that. If anything, it showed me what a fool I was to have taken a break from our relationship in the first place. You, love, are all I've ever wanted. I told Alexa, while I liked her very much, I was still madly in love with my wife. And I'm very glad to say she respected my decision, and we parted amicably. I never heard a word from her again, and neither did I expect to. I had absolutely no idea that she became pregnant. No idea at all. I wish she would have told me this. You never told me any of this, Callum, I said, feeling my heckles rise. How could you? And now this girl here is claiming to be your long-lost daughter. You've got some serious explaining to do, Callum. Did you not hear a word I said, love? Don't you remember we agreed to split up, to go our separate ways for a few weeks or so, to decide where our marriage was going long-term? Those were the loneliest, longest 6 weeks of my entire life. Alexa was there for me. She made it more bearable. But you know it's only ever been you that I've loved. We both agreed to the separation, did we not? After we'd gone through some disagreements together. Surely you remember all that? Yes, I remember. And I agreed to the separation. But I didn't agree to you charging off with some other woman and making babies with her. How could you do this to me, Callum? For your information, I never cheated on you during our separation. I never even considered it for a second. Love, I told you, I'm very sorry. I was lonely. Alexa, she was good company for me. But nothing more, love. I can promise you that. You're sorry, are you, Callum? That's rich coming from you. What you did was disgusting. You hear that? Disgusting. We had not agreed to end our relationship at the time. We agreed to a trial separation, and that's completely different. That did not include your cheating on me. You never told me what you did. You're treacherous, Callum. That's what you are. Do I even know you anymore? I wonder about that. I thought we promised there would never ever be any secrets between the two of us. Yet you betrayed my trust. At the very least, you should have been man enough to own up to what you did. What was the point, love? Said my husband, looking at me sheepishly, with a pained look in his eyes. I thought about telling you long and hard. Believe me, I did. As we agreed to having no secrets between us. But this was different. It was like a secret with a sharp blade that could easily hurt and slice through you. And I decided against telling you, as I knew you would be so upset about the whole thing. I thought, why would I want to break the heart of the woman I love most in the world? I mean, why do that? It makes no sense at all. It's like ripping a Band-Aid, pulling off a scab, and making the wound bleed all over again. And who does that if they've got any sense? I thought if you didn't know about it, it wouldn't hurt you. Even my mother advised me against telling you. She thought it was for the best. Your mother thought it was for the best, did she? You've got to be kidding me, Callum. You're telling me your mother knows all about this, all about your indiscretion? This is so incredibly embarrassing. I can't believe you actually had the nerve to tell her this. I wanted her advice. I didn't want to hurt you, love. It's a bit late for that, Callum, is it not? Isn't it funny how the treachery of our past has a funny way of sneaking up on us when we least expect it to? Let me tell you something, Callum. This young lady over here is not lying to you. She's definitely your daughter. When I saw her standing there in the doorway, I thought to myself she was a dead ringer for our Julia. And then she lets this cat out of the bag and claims to be your other daughter. This is crazy. Forgive me if I'm having trouble digesting all of this. Who's Julia? Asked the young woman, looking from me to my husband with an inquiring curiosity. Julia is my daughter, and you look astonishingly like her, doesn't she, Callum? I said, giving my husband a formidable glare. At least my husband had the decency to blush, which was jolly good of him, I suppose. Although at that precise moment I wondered if the man I'd married was good at all. How could he have not told me about the relationship he'd enjoyed with Alexa Muldooney? During our brief 6-week split, when our relationship was going through some turbulent times. I mean, my husband had met Alexa Muldooney at a bar. How unwholesome and tacky can you get? I'd have been very hurt that he'd done this to me behind my back. Of course I would. But I would have ultimately forgiven him in the circumstances. But learning about these objectionable goings-on, all these long years later, made me feel more and more affronted about my husband's obvious betrayal. It was debasing, degrading and mortifying to learn that my mother-in-law Eleanor knew all about my husband's dirty laundry. In fact, she had her hands right in it. Worse still, it was harder to learn that Callum had sired another child with another woman, who was now dead. I knew this young woman standing before me, or teenager if you like, in our entrance hall, with her long dark hair, pale skin and black lipstick, had to be Callum's daughter. The girl was definitely not lying about that, but boy did I wish she was. Her boyfriend Carpenter, the disagreeable, icky character from the bus, who looked as unwholesome and rough at the edges as ever, gave me a smug, self-satisfied look, as if he was thoroughly enjoying my disquiet. I glared at him, and he returned the favour, but there was a squalid, rank cockiness to his demeanour. I didn't like him one bit, and wondered why a nice girl like Sophia was hanging around with a loser like him. I knew if my daughter met Sophia, she'd wonder if she was meeting her double, even without a DNA confirmation, to prove whether Sophia was indeed my husband's daughter. I think he knew it was the truth, as did I. The one thing I will say for Sophia Muldooney is that she had more sensitivity than my husband, who stood there gawking at his daughter, as if seeing a ghost, and for a long time he seemed to have been lost for words, as he tried very hard to allow the truth of her startling revelations to finally sink in, rather like the oil on a wooden table, taking its time to be fully absorbed. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Barclay. This can't be easy for you to hear," said the teenager, "but I'm not going to apologize for being born, and whether you like it or not, I am your husband's daughter." I glared at the young woman rather unkindly. Her words were abrasive and scratchy, like sandpaper. I turned around to look at her fiercely. "Of course it's not easy to hear. How do you think I feel? That my husband was sleeping with your mother behind my back? And if that's not bad enough, I find out that he has a daughter with her that he never even knew about. What do you mean by coming here, young lady? Are you expecting to move in with us, become part of our family? Because if that's what you're thinking, forget about it. It's not going to happen," I said, stamping my foot belligerently. Carpenter began to smirk. His lips twitched, and a rather vindictive smile spread across his face. And then he spoke. "I know you're upset, Maggie Barclay, and I kind of feel sorry for you, even though you're a judgmental cow. Whether you like it or not, your husband has a responsibility to his daughter. He can't abandon her. She's got nothing, no one. Her mother is dead. Think about that for a moment. Her mother is gone. Whether you like it or not, your husband's name is on her birth certificate, and DNA tests will prove she is his daughter. So you have a duty of responsibility towards her. Sophia is only 16 years old, and you would probably never have known about her if Alexa Muldooney had not died in the dreadful way she did. But it is what it is." "This young man is absolutely right, love," said my husband, looking at me pleadingly. "I believe that Sophia Muldooney, this young lady over here, may indeed be my daughter. Of course, we will need to affirm this with the obvious DNA tests, but I can see she looks exactly like Julia. I have no reason to doubt her claims. Her timing would be dead on. I'm sorry, love, I really am, but I cannot possibly abandon my own daughter, if she is indeed my flesh and blood. She will need to move in with the family. You need to be reasonable, love. I'm begging you. I didn't ask for this to happen, did I? But it did, and we need to make the best of this situation. I realize if we hadn't had the trial separation, none of this would have happened. I was in a bad place at the time, very lonely. You know how it is." "No, I don't know how it is, Callum," I retorted. "Stop making excuses for yourself. It's pathetic. You're pathetic. Have you ever stopped to consider our children, Callum? Are you going to tell them about your infidelity? Or should I? Because this is a conversation I'm not looking forward to have. What are our kids going to think when they learn about what you did to me?" "There's no need to be like this, love. Look, I told you I'm not proud of myself." "Be like what?" I said. "I just cannot listen to any of this. You're trying to justify what happened. It makes me sick to my stomach. I feel ill about this, Callum, ill. I honestly don't know how to react to this news. It's very, very unsettling." Before Callum could respond to me, I took flight, like a bird eager to get away from a stalking cat. I ran out of the house with my purse tightly clutched in my hand, and realized with bitter disappointment that I couldn't get into my car to drive away, as I would normally have done. Why did it still have to be at the damn car dealership? I should never have bought a Japanese model, with parts that needed to be imported from Japan. The only option I had now was to take a quick shortcut through the woods and get to the back road to wait for a bus to come, to take me to town. I needed to get as far away from Callum as I could. I was surprised my husband didn't run after me, begging me to forgive him, professing his apologies, but he did none of the above. Maybe he thought better of it, and that it would be good for me to let off steam on my own, before I finally returned home, like the ever-dutiful wife that I was. I have never felt so aggrieved, so desperately betrayed in all my life. And to think my husband's mother knew about my husband's peccadillo, and was involved in this violation of our marital privacy, made me want to vomit up the contents of my stomach. I indignantly stomped through the trees, kicking up leaves furiously along the footpath, and thumping the ground, as if kicking it, I was indirectly inflicting a blow on my husband. I began to curse under my breath, saying some less than kind things about my husband, that I dare not repeat. My cursing turned into sobs, and then I was blinded by my tears, that began to shamelessly trail down my cheeks, like the globlets of rain on a glass pane. I walked through the trees and accidentally found myself on the wrong footpath, and this made me all the more upset. I couldn't walk any further. The idea of getting to the bus stop just seemed to become overwhelming. I reluctantly collapsed on the floor beneath a tree, and began to sob my heart out. I cried for a long time, until the tears dried up. My body couldn't produce any more. For a while I curled up under the tree, lying on some dry fallen leaves, resting my head on my purse, and then, against all the odds, I fell into a deep sleep.
Now, I had not anticipated that this would happen, but I guess I was so emotionally exhausted, so overwrought, so incredibly distressed, I would never normally be comfortable falling asleep in a wood grove all on my own, especially when the evening eventually beckoned. But these were extenuating circumstances that fell out of the boundaries of normality, for there had been nothing ordinary about this Saturday morning. I could only thank God that my children had not been privy to this startling, disconcerting news. I knew one thing for sure, was that I did not want to go home to face Callum. I was still so aggrieved with him. All I actually wanted to do was to throttle him. I couldn't believe the life I'd always known, our happy family of 4 to enjoy, was now threatened by this interloper, and this was because my own husband had cheated on me during the brief 6-week sabbatical in our relationship. I hasten to say knowing this hurt me deeply, as my husband Callum and I had always agreed never ever to keep secrets from each other. Was there anything else my husband was hiding from me? I could not help but wonder. I do not know where the day went to. It seemed to be dominated by its own set of galactic rules. The hours slipped away so fast that I don't know where they went to, nor did I actually care very much. The sun became like a remote stranger, finely setting, swaddling the sky in a golden shimmer. Darkness stole its way across the firmament in a velvety curtain that was now glowing with dazzling silver stars that danced around the pretty face of a pearly moon. But I witnessed none of these dramatic transformations, for I lay blindly oblivious in a fitful slumber under the tree. I heard the crickets and frogs singing their tuneful nightly choruses, along with 2 people engaging in chatter together in a rather strange language. The voices sounded unduly alarmed. Kotolo, kitaki, akila kwaki, motola sana tulusho. Amiga, inata, hokopolo, kikitaki, hoko. But I believed this was the entertainment that my dreams was obviously inviting. I stretched out my legs on the earthen floor, strewn with leaves and rambling foliage. I was expecting to feel my fine cotton sheets on me, but instead my environment felt rather earthy. Someone was tapping me on the cheeks, while they continued to engage in earnest conversation. Kitaki, hamakila, omoki, sifatashi nakwa, habasilopo, pikitikati, hoko. I could hear this backwards and forwards chatter, and it was oddly comforting to me, like when you fall asleep with the radio on. Some might find that rather annoying, but never me. I felt blissfully comfortable in my dreamy state, enjoying the background noises. I didn't want to wake up. I felt cosily warm, as if I was covered in a duvet. I was to realize later I had in fact been covered with a blanket, completely made out of straw-like plant material, that had been crocheted together masterfully by a pair of proficient hands. The strange, seemingly faraway voices continued. Kiliki, akasi kwasha, mukolo. Amina, ilatali kolopasha, ilatilani. Pakikati, hopo. But everything felt so natural. All of a sudden, someone was speaking directly to me, rather like a nurse in an ambulance, telling you that you're in good hands and everything's going to be all right, but you've been involved in an accident. It was that kind of rather bizarre, paradoxical experience. The tapping was now on my shoulders. The pressure exerted on me was now harder than before. It almost had an urgency about it. Someone was definitely trying to wake me up. I opened my eyes rather reluctantly, because I was so enjoying the deliciousness of my sleep. I would have screamed in terror if I hadn't recognized the familiar friendly face of the Bigfoot staring down at me through her kind treacle-colored eyes. I recognized her at once. This was the same kind Bigfoot that had rescued me from the tree branch rather recently and escorted me back to my home. I opened my eyes wider and sat up with a start. My attention was directed to not only the female Bigfoot, but to her male companion as well. They were standing side by side, looking heartily relieved to see that I was wide awake and healthy. They exchanged happy glances between themselves, as if they were saying, "Thank God she's going to be all right." I think they had stumbled across me by accident, lying on the forest floor, underneath the tall tree, in a fetal position, and were probably alarmed by my sorry state. They had no way of knowing the grief I'd been subjected to, or about the tears I'd cried, that in my exhaustion had finally driven me to sleep. I should have been thoroughly enjoying an evening meal with my husband in town by now, at our favourite restaurant, because he had promised to spoil me rotten today. But that was never going to happen. He was the last person I wished to see at this very point. The abrupt in-my-face memories of the morning, and the fortuitous, unfortunate appearance of Sophia Muldooney, accompanied by her seedy boyfriend Carpenter, made for a rather ugly rude awakening, for I'd hoped to never see that young man ever again. I shuddered as I recalled it all, the warped details of my husband's infidelity, that were like rubbing salt into an open wound. It really stung. I knew, of course, that Callan was probably not worrying about me. Well, not at the moment, anyway, even though it was dark. He was probably so caught up in the thoughts of the surprised daughter that had arrived on the scene of his life, like a parcel that he had never seen coming, that had been lost out at sea for over 16 years, and had now been recovered, like a pirate's treasure trove. He probably hadn't even given me a second's thought. How I wished that I'd managed to get the bus into town, and booked myself into a luxurious hotel for a couple of nights, to give me some space to think. Now I knew I had to go back home, with my tail between my legs, and be forced to face my husband, and talk about a subject I just did not want to discuss by any manner of means. The female was speaking to the Bigfoot. Pakitala, kolopasa, amina, ilata, kita, olapa. He seemed to nod in understanding. Then he turned around to walk away, giving me a shrug and a nod in farewell. He was so much bigger than she was, and I think the female was worried I might be rather intimidated by him. I suspect she had told him as much, so that was why he was leaving. But it really wasn't necessary. I could see he was a very gentle soul. The female spoke to me kindly. Kitaki, kutolopata. Are you all right? We got quite the shock seeing you lying there, under the tree. Your energy was almost as black as death, the colour of despair. Kutoli, pasikati, nolopani. And of course hopelessness as well. I thought you were dying. You gave us quite the fright. We were very, very concerned about you. Oh, me? I'm going to be absolutely fine, I said. It's just been, one of those rough days. I was touched to the quick that the female Bigfoot seemed to care so much about my welfare. She took my hand in hers, and it swallowed my hand up, like a tiny island that got lost in New York State somewhere. Her hands were that big. I guess I felt rather like a fragile doll in her company, but at the same time so protected and cared for. Kolitanika, sukosholo, you better come with me, she said. Kilaki casa, you need to get back home safely. Hopolapita. And my bet is you're not going to see terribly clearly without my guiding you. Kilatilasi, I'll lead the way. Tolopati, I see well in the dark. I noticed that the Bigfoot's nocturnal vision was excellent. Her eyes gave off a yellow eyeshine, very similar to that of a bear's. I was grateful for her guiding me so judiciously through the trees, as I can guarantee you, without her help, I don't think I could have returned home without stumbling awkwardly all over the place, despite the generous moonlight. I was rather befuddled to see that there were no lights on in my house. Everything was conspicuously dark, and that was incredibly unusual. Something felt strangely off. I was surprised the Bigfoot had walked me straight to the front door. She nodded at me, turned around, and glided away through the trees. I pulled out the house keys from my purse, and rather reluctantly opened the door. It squeaked open. I staggered around in the hallway, putting on all the lights, wondering where on earth my husband had got to, for he was nowhere to be found. I hit pay dirt when I discovered my husband in the living room, sitting there on the couch, staring absent-mindedly into space. But when he saw me entering the room, he practically jumped out of his skin, and then, recognizing me, he ran towards me, throwing his arms around me. "Oh, thank God you're all right, love. Where the hell have you been? I thought you'd booked into a hotel for the night. Taken a bus to town, perhaps." "If you must know, I never actually reached the town. I failed to do so. But I'd rather not tell you about my less than pleasant afternoon. Some of it was all right, but then you probably wouldn't believe it anyway."
"Fair enough. I'm very sorry, love. Sorry about absolutely everything. I don't know what to say. Everything came out of the woodwork this morning, and it wasn't the termites. It was a lot worse than that. I don't know how to apologize for everything. There should not have been any secrets between us. I should have told you all about Alexa Muldooney. That was very foolish of me not to tell you about it, and I'm very, very sorry."
"I'd rather we didn't discuss the matter any more, love. I just don't have the stomach for it right now." To cut a rather long story short, the Barclay family, my family that is, had to make all kinds of adjustments to welcome Sophia Muldooney into the fold. In the beginning it was far from easy, with lots of hiccups along the way. As can be expected, the DNA tests confirmed that Sophia Muldooney was indeed my husband's daughter. I was surprised that my children welcomed her without any expression of condemnation or judgment towards their father. On the contrary, they thought it was so cool to have another sister, and it would seem that Sophia and Julia became inseparable, as they were uncannily so alike. And for a while, I'm afraid to say, my own daughter dressed like a goth, with black hair and black lipstick, until she got tired of the look, when one day she realized having only black in her wardrobe, without any other colours, was dull and dreary to say the very least. I guess children are a lot more resilient than we actually give them credit for. We were to discover that the no-nonsense Jane Goodlington, who could lightly extract blood from a stone if given the chance, had boldly confronted her brother Hugh about Alexa Muldooney's death. She had demanded a confession from him when she discovered a muddy footprint of his on the outer ledge of her patio that could have only gotten there if someone had been clandestinely sliding from her balcony over to Alexa Muldooney's balcony. Even the police had failed to notice the very obvious evidence. In the end, Hugh admitted to pushing Alexa Muldooney over the balcony railings to her death, not expecting his sister Jane to grass on him. But he had underestimated her, for she presented the police with a taped confession from her brother, and he was subsequently taken into prison and charged with murder. The good news is he will never be getting out, but God only knows why Alexa Muldooney did handstands on her patio railings in the first place. That was almost certainly asking for trouble, if you ask me. I mean, why would you go tempting fate? Just saying. It took a long while for me to warm to Sophia Muldooney. I'm not going to lie about that, as after all she was the progeny of another woman. But in the last year or so, I began to love her. I can honestly say she's become a beloved member of our family. Sometimes I even forget that she's not my own daughter, and I couldn't imagine our lives without her in it. I do know my husband adores her, as do both of my children. I will say I'm very glad she and Julia abandoned the goth look, and she finally saw sense, and broke up with that layabout carpenter. I never understood what she saw in that seedy boyfriend of hers, but I have to remind myself that I was a teenager once, and I also went through a rebellious stage like that. As for the Bigfoots, sometimes when I'm out in the woodgrove, I might see my friend in passing. She'll give me a nod, but no one else in our family sees her, and as for the male, well, he remains completely elusive. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.